The bank manager slid my mortgage application across the polished mahogany desk. The red ink stamping the word denied bled through the heavy paper. "You have a $95,000 commercial loan in default," he said, his voice dripping with a pity that made my skin crawl. I stared at the numbers. I did not sign that document. My parents forged my signature to fund my older brother's failing business. When I confronted my father hours later, he simply shrugged, took a sip of iced tea, and told me they would pay me back someday. So I smiled, recorded the conversation, and liquidated every asset my brother owned. My name is Kim, and I am 31 years old. Before I tell you how I dismantled my family's grand illusion, let me know in the comments how old you are and where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe to Zara Told Stories if you believe toxic family members deserve exactly what they have coming to them. The air conditioning in Mr. Davis's office hummed a low, steady note, but I felt a single bead of sweat trace its way down my spine. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the bank, the Oklahoma City skyline shimmered under the unforgiving late afternoon heat. For 6 years, I had funneled every spare dollar from my salary into a high-yield savings account. I was a logistics director, managing freight lines across the Midwest, and I was finally closing on my sanctuary. The property was a restored craftsman home on 2 acres of rolling hills just outside Tulsa. It featured a wraparound porch, original hardwood floors, and enough quiet to drown out the endless noise of my corporate life. Now that sanctuary was dissolving right in front of me. Mr. Davis cleared his throat, pulling my attention back to the present. He refused to meet my eyes, opting instead to stare at the gold pen resting on his blotter. "Kim," he started, shifting uncomfortably in his leather chair. "Your debt-to-income ratio has spiked overnight. We cannot clear the underwriting for the mortgage." I kept my tone level. I prided myself on control. "That makes no sense. I have 0 debt, my car is paid off, and I clear my credit cards every single Friday. My credit score was 810 last week." He tapped a highlighted line on the credit report printout. "You have a commercial loan originating out of Edmond. The principal is $95,000. It hit collections 3 days ago, dropping your score by 150 points. The numbers blurred together on the page. 95,000. I shook my head, a hollow laugh escaping my throat. There has to be a mistake, a stolen identity. I never signed for a commercial loan. Mr. Davis offered a tight, sympathetic smile. "The lender holds an electronic signature verified by your Social Security number. It is connected to an IP address in your hometown. It is legally binding until proven otherwise. I am sorry, Kim. The Tulsa property sellers are moving to the next offer." I walked out of the bank into the suffocating August heat, the asphalt radiating through the soles of my shoes. The dream house was gone. The safety I had spent my entire 20s building had evaporated in a 10-minute meeting. To understand how a ghost debt dismantled my life, we have to rewind exactly 48 hours. It was Tuesday afternoon. I sat in my corner office at the logistics firm, charting aerospace components moving between Wichita and Houston. The desk phone flashed red. A voicemail. I hit the speaker button, keeping my eyes locked on my dual monitors. "This message is for Kimberly Roberts. This is Apex Financial Recovery. We are attempting to collect a debt 90 days past due. Please contact us immediately." I rolled my eyes, assuming it was a phishing scam targeting corporate lines. Still, corporate policy required me to clear all financial inquiries linked to my direct extension, so I dialed the toll-free number. A representative named Greg answered. His tone carried the practiced, weary edge of a man used to dodging insults for a living. "I received a spam call about a debt," I told him, clicking my pen against the desk. "I would like my number removed from your registry." "Let me pull up the file," Greg said. Keys clacked rapidly over the line. "Kimberly Roberts, I need to verify the last 4 digits of your Social Security number." I rattled them off, expecting him to say there was no match and apologize for the inconvenience. "Thank you," Greg said. "I have the file right here. The commercial loan originated 8 months ago. The principal balance is $95,000. It is currently 90 days delinquent, which is why your account was flagged for immediate recovery." I stopped clicking my pen. The hum of the servers down the hall and the distant chatter from the bullpen outside my door faded into a static ringing in my ears. "I do not have a commercial loan, Greg. You have the wrong person. We have your full Social Security number, your previous residential address in Edmond, and your verified electronic signature on the promissory note," he replied, his voice losing its tired edge and adopting a firm, clinical tone. He paused, the silence stretching taut over the line. "We also have the verified signatures of the 2 co-signers, Dale and Patty Roberts, your parents." My breath caught in my throat. The room seemed to tilt slightly. My parents, the people who were supposed to protect me, had tethered my name to a financial anchor. I pressed my palm against the cool wood of my desk, trying to ground myself. "Email me those documents right now," I whispered. 2 minutes later, a heavy PDF file materialized in my inbox. I opened it with a trembling hand. There it was, my name, typed out in a sterile cursive font, finalizing a staggering financial obligation. I scrolled through the pages, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon until I found the final authorization page. I checked the timestamp on the digital signature. October 14th. I pulled up my digital calendar, toggling back through the months. On October 14th, I was 300 miles away, sitting in a Dallas conference room, negotiating freight rates with a room full of trucking executives. I had the hotel receipts, the toll tags, and the corporate expense reports to prove it. A cold, heavy realization settled deep in my chest. My parents had not just made a careless mistake. They had calculated this. They had waited until I was out of state, logged onto their home computer, and executed a federal document using the Social Security number they had memorized since I was a child. I printed the 50-page loan packet. I stood over the office printer, watching the machine rhythmically spit out the evidence of my stolen future, page by page. Each sheet of paper felt like a betrayal made physical. I gathered the warm stack of paper, shoved it into my leather briefcase, and grabbed my car keys. I abandoned my logistics reports without a second thought. The drive from Oklahoma City to their suburban enclave in Edmond usually takes 40 minutes. That afternoon, it felt like an eternity suspended in a blur of highway lines and flat prairie grass. Outside my window, steel pump jacks nodded rhythmically in the dusty fields. Their mechanical, endless motion mirrored my racing thoughts. The betrayal gnawed at the edges of my sanity. Why $95,000? The number was too specific to be random. Then, the pieces clicked into place. My older brother Brad had spent the last year bragging at every family dinner about his brilliant new venture, a luxury truck detailing business. He had loudly complained about needing nearly $100,000 in startup capital to secure the leasing rights and industrial equipment. He had ruined his own credit years ago on failed crypto investments and unpaid sports cars. My parents had always viewed Brad as the golden child, the former high school quarterback who could do no wrong. I was just the invisible daughter, the one expected to quietly fund her own life so they could pour all their resources into his endless string of next big things. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My pristine financial foundation, built on years of missing vacations and working late nights, had been secretly hollowed out to buy my brother a shiny new toy. I took the final exit off the highway and navigated the familiar, manicured streets of their neighborhood. The lawns were perfectly green, hiding the rot beneath the surface. As I pulled into my parents' long concrete driveway, my suspicion was confirmed. Parked directly in front of the house, Gleaming under the harsh Oklahoma sun was Brad's brand new, fully loaded pickup truck. I turned off the ignition. The silence in the cabin of my car was deafening. I looked at the heavy stack of printed loan documents sitting on the passenger seat. The illusion of my family was dead. It was time to show them exactly what happens when you steal from someone who knows how to fight back. The drive through the Oklahoma suburbs felt like moving through a thick wall of water. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the hollow, sinking sensation in my chest. Outside, the familiar landscape of Edmond rolled past. Rows of brick houses with perfect Bermuda grass lawns, pristine sidewalks, and American flags hanging lazily in the heavy August heat. To anyone looking from the street, this was a community of upstanding citizens. To the world, the Roberts family was the picture of middle-class respectability. My mother, Patty, spent her weekends hosting neighborhood association meetings and pruning her prized rose bushes. My father, Dale, was a middle manager at an oil services firm, a man who ironed his jeans and spoke loudly about personal responsibility. They worshipped the illusion of perfection. But behind the heavy oak front door of our childhood home, a rigid caste system dictated our lives. At the very top of that system sat my older brother, Brad. Brad was the golden boy. He had been the starting quarterback for his high school football team, a local hero for 2 brief years. He peaked at 18. Now, at 33, he still wore his faded Letterman jacket to local sports bars and talked about the state championship they almost won. He had bounced from one failed venture to another. There was a disastrous attempt at day trading crypto, a landscaping business that folded when he forgot to pay taxes, and a string of impulsive car purchases that resulted in multiple repossessions. His credit score was a wasteland, yet Dale and Patty never stopped coddling him. They viewed his failures as mere strokes of bad luck, unfair hurdles placed in the path of a genius who just needed one more break. I was the opposite. I was the invisible daughter, the one expected to be quiet, to demand nothing, and to figure out my own survival so they could direct all their financial and emotional capital toward Brad. A memory flared in my mind, sharp and stinging, as I waited at a red light. I was 18 years old. It was late August, just a week before my freshman year of college was supposed to begin. I had earned a partial academic scholarship, but it did not cover the exorbitant cost of university textbooks. I had saved what I could from my summer job, but I was still $500 short. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table, arranging my printed syllabi and a list of required reading materials. Dale walked in, poured himself a mug of black coffee, and stood over me. "Dad, I need a tiny favor," I had said, my voice shaking with nervous energy. "I am $500 short for my biology and chemistry books. I just need you to co-sign a small student loan. I will make the payments every month from my part-time job. I promise." Dale did not even look at the paperwork. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his coffee. His eyes were cold, calculating, and entirely devoid of empathy. "We do not do handouts in this house, Kim," he said, his voice flat and final. "You are an adult now. If you cannot afford the tools you need for your education, you need to work harder. Brad is going through a tough transition with his sports injury, and our resources are tied up. Figure it out." He walked away, leaving me sitting in the quiet kitchen with my worthless syllabi. I did figure it out. I got a job working the graveyard shift at a distribution warehouse. I spent my freshman year smelling like cardboard dust and stale coffee, loading pallets until 4 in the morning, and then dragging myself to early lectures. I paid for my own books. I paid for my own tuition. I built my credit from the ground up, fighting for every single point. I had not asked my parents for a single dime in 13 years. And now, The very credit score I had sacrificed my youth to build had been hijacked to fund the brother who had never worked a night shift in his life. The light turned green. I pressed the accelerator, the engine roaring in the quiet suburban street. How did they think they could hide a $95,000 federal crime? The answer lay in my father's obsessive need for control. Another memory surfaced, darker this time. When I lived at home, Dale monitored the incoming mail like a prison warden. Every afternoon, at exactly 3 o'clock, he would stand by the front window, parting the blinds just enough to watch the postal worker drop the stack into our brick mailbox. Before anyone else could reach the driveway, Dale would march out, gather the envelopes, and sort them in his locked home office. The low, grinding hum of his heavy-duty crosscut shredder was a daily soundtrack in our house. Bank statements, credit card offers, past due notices for Brad. Dale intercepted and destroyed anything that threatened the narrative of his perfect family. He controlled the flow of information. He must have assumed he could do the same with this loan. He probably routed all the physical mail to his address, planning to intercept the billing statements before I ever saw them. But his arrogant, analog mind had forgotten one crucial detail. We live in a digital age. The bank performed a hard credit pull for my mortgage underwriting, pulling his buried secrets directly into the light. I reached for my phone, mounted on the dashboard vent. In the logistics industry, truck dispatchers often lie about their locations, and freight vendors frequently backtrack on agreed rates. Early in my career, I learned to protect myself. I downloaded an audio recording app. Oklahoma is a one-party consent state, meaning as long as I am part of the conversation, I have the legal right to record it without informing the other person. I tapped the screen. The small red microphone icon lit up, the timer beginning its silent count. I wanted a permanent record of whatever lies, excuses, or gaslighting they were about to deploy. I tossed the phone into the front pocket of my leather tote bag, ensuring the microphone was exposed. My mind returned to the staggering sum. $95,000. It was such a specific, astronomical number. Why not 10,000? Why not 50? The pieces snapped together with sickening clarity. 3 months ago, we had all endured a torturous Sunday dinner at my parents' house. Brad had stood by the kitchen island, holding a premium imported beer, talking loudly over everyone else. He was pitching his latest grand scheme. "It is going to be a luxury truck detailing service," Brad had boasted, leaning against the granite countertop. "Mobile fleets, corporate contracts, the works. I already have the business plan. I just need the capital to secure the commercial leasing rights, buy 3 industrial power washers, and wrap a primary service vehicle. It is a gold mine. I just need close to $100,000 to get it off the ground." Patty had looked at him with shining, adoring eyes. Dale had nodded in solemn agreement, treating Brad's empty words like a boardroom presentation. At the time, I had rolled my eyes, assuming no bank in their right mind would lend Brad a dime. I was right. No bank would lend to Brad. But they would lend to Kim. I turned the steering wheel, my tires gliding onto my parents' pristine oak-lined street. The houses here were set back from the road, boasting wide driveways and 3-car garages. I slowed my vehicle as I approached their property. My foot slammed on the brake pedal. I stared through the windshield, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Parked squarely in the center of their wide concrete driveway was a brand-new, heavy-duty Ford F-250. It was a beast of a machine. The midnight black paint gleamed under the harsh afternoon sun. The windows were tinted dark, the chrome trim sparkled, and an expensive, customized lifting suspension made it tower over my sensible sedan. The bed of the truck was outfitted with gleaming, commercial-grade power washing equipment. On the side door, a fresh professional vinyl decal read, "Robert's Luxury Detailing." The physical manifestation of my stolen identity was sitting right in front of me. My chest tightened, making it difficult to draw a full breath. My uncrackable financial foundation, the quiet, safe life I had built with my own two hands, the wraparound porch of my dream home. It had all been secretly hollowed out, excavated and burned just to buy my brother a shiny toy. I put my car in park. I did not turn off the engine immediately. I just sat there, the air conditioning blasting against my face, looking at the truck. The symbolism was thick and suffocating. They had taken my invisible labor and turned it into his highly visible status symbol. I reached over to the passenger seat and picked up the thick stack of printed loan documents. The paper felt heavy, loaded with the weight of a felony. I slung my tote bag over my shoulder, checking one last time to ensure the red recording light was still flashing in the darkness of my pocket. I pushed the car door open and stepped out into the suffocating heat. The soles of my shoes clicked against the concrete driveway as I walked past the massive tires of the F-250. I did not bother ringing the doorbell. I grabbed the brass handle, pushed the heavy oak door open, and stepped into the cool, climate-controlled air of my childhood home. The heavy oak front door clicked shut behind me, sealing out the stifling Oklahoma heat. The air conditioning inside the house washed over my skin, carrying the familiar, suffocating scent of lemon polish and fresh vanilla. The foyer was immaculate. Framed photographs lined the walls, showcasing a carefully curated history of the Roberts family. Brad in his football uniform, Brad holding a generic trophy, Brad standing next to my parents at his high school graduation. I appeared in exactly 2 photos, relegated to the background, a silent extra in the cinematic production of my brother's life. I marched past the formal dining room, my leather heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I rounded the corner into the pristine, sunlit kitchen. Dale and Patty were seated at the sprawling granite island. The afternoon light filtered through the plantation shutters, casting geometric shadows across the pristine countertops. My father wore his signature crisp polo shirt, casually flipping through a golf magazine. My mother was scrolling through her tablet, a crystal glass of iced tea resting near her perfectly manicured hand. The scene was the epitome of suburban tranquility, a flawless domestic painting hiding a core of absolute rot. I did not say a word. I simply raised my arm and let the thick stack of printed loan documents fall onto the granite island. The heavy thud echoed sharply against the subway tile backsplash. The sound jolted them. Dale looked up from his magazine, his brow furrowing in immediate irritation. He despised interruptions, especially in his own home. He glanced down at the paper, his eyes catching the bold corporate logo of Apex Financial Recovery on the top sheet. Patty looked at the documents, and the color drained from her face in an instant. Her sun-kissed skin turned an ashen, sickly gray. She lowered her tablet slowly, her hands developing a sudden, visible tremor. "What is this?" I asked. My voice was dangerously even, stripped of any warmth. I used the same clinical tone I reserved for negligent freight dispatchers who cost my company money. Dale stared at the paper for a long moment. He did not look ashamed. He did not look panicked. He merely sighed, a long, dramatic exhalation of air, as if dealing with a subordinate complaining about a minor scheduling error. "I received a phone call today," I continued, planting my hands on the edge of the granite island and leaning forward. "A debt collector informed me that my mortgage application was denied because I am 90 days delinquent on a $95,000 loan. A commercial loan, bearing my electronic signature. A signature applied from this house's IP address while I was 300 miles away in Texas." Patty pressed her trembling fingers against her mouth. "Oh, Kim," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the stainless steel refrigerator. Dale picked up his glass of iced tea. The ice clinked gently against the crystal. He took a slow, deliberate sip before setting it back down on a cork coaster. "We needed to secure the startup capital for your brother's detailing business," Dale said. His tone was casual, conversational, as if he were explaining why he chose a different brand of lawn fertilizer. His credit score took a hit last year after that unfortunate misunderstanding with the landscaping equipment. The commercial lenders wanted an exorbitant interest rate. You boast an 800 credit score, Kim. We used your profile to secure a premium tier. It saved the boy thousands of dollars in interest over the life of the term. I stared at him, trying to comprehend the sheer scale of his delusion. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. You forged a federal document. You stole my identity to buy Brad a luxury truck. Stop being so dramatic, Dale scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. He leaned back in his tall bar stool, crossing his arms over his chest. We did what we had to do to keep the family moving forward. Family helps family. We assumed Brad would make the monthly payments on time. He promised us his revenue would cover the overhead by month 3. It really is not a big deal. Not a big deal. The words hung in the air, toxic and heavy. My pristine financial record, the foundation of my independence, meant nothing to him. To Dale, I was not a daughter, I was a resource. I was an unharvested field of good credit, and he felt entirely entitled to reap the benefits. This is wire fraud, I said, my voice rising just a fraction, the icy facade beginning to crack under the weight of my fury. You committed a felony. I lost my dream house today because of you. The bank denied my mortgage. My earnest money is gone. At the mention of the lost house, Patty shattered. But she did not cry out of remorse. She executed a maneuver I had witnessed 1,000 times throughout my childhood. She weaponized her tears, pivoting instantly from a guilty conspirator into a fragile victim. Please, Kim, please do not yell at your father, Patty sobbed. Tears spilled over her eyelashes, ruining her pristine makeup. She reached across the granite island, her manicured fingers clawing at the sleeve of my blazer. I recoiled, stepping back as if her touch would burn me. We are under so much stress, Patty wept, her voice trembling with practiced theatricality. The debt collectors call the house 6 times a day. They are so hostile. They threaten to seize the vehicles. It is ruining my nerves. I cannot even sleep at night, knowing these horrible people are coming after us. I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling a profound, chilling detachment. She was not crying because they had destroyed my future. She was crying because the consequences of her actions were causing her a minor inconvenience. Then fix it, I demanded. Call the lender, tell them you committed fraud and transfer the balance into your own names. Sell your assets. Do whatever it takes to remove my name from that promissory note today. Dale let out a harsh, barking laugh. Do not be ridiculous. We cannot qualify for that kind of principal on our current income. And we are not liquidating our retirement accounts because you are throwing a tantrum over a temporary credit dip. He leaned forward, planting his elbows on the island, his expression hardening into a glare. Look, the boy hit a rough patch with his client acquisition. He is just a few months behind. All you need to do is pay the $4,500 past due balance. I blinked, certain the blood rushing in my ears had distorted his words. You want me to pay the arrears on a loan I never signed? Just to get the recovery agents off our backs for the month, Patty pleaded, wiping her eyes with a linen napkin. You make such a wonderful salary at the logistics firm, sweetie. $4,000 is nothing to you. You do not have children to feed. You do not have the burdens Brad has. Just cover the gap until his business scales up. We will pay you back someday, Kim, Dale added, offering a non-committal shrug. Just write a check and stop making everyone miserable. I looked back and forth between them. The sheer, breathtaking audacity paralyzed me for a fleeting second. They did not just steal my name, they expected me to actively finance their crime. They expected me to assume the role of a silent, obedient ATM, absorbing the catastrophic fallout of Brad's failures so they could maintain the illusion of their perfect son. No, I said. The word dropped between us like a stone. I am not giving you a single dime." Dale stood up. He towered over the island, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. His authoritative mask slipped, revealing the tyrant beneath. "You are a selfish, ungrateful daughter," he sneered, pointing a thick finger at my chest. "We put a roof over your head for 18 years. We fed you. We clothed you. The one time your brother needs a lifeline, the one time this family asks you to step up and show some loyalty, you turn your back on us. You care more about some stupid house in Tulsa than your own blood." He was rewriting history right in front of me. He was erasing my graveyard shifts, my student loans, the decade I spent building my life without a single shred of their support. In his mind, my success was a communal asset, and my refusal to surrender it was an act of treason. I reached down and picked up my leather tote bag. The red recording light on my phone glowed dimly in the shadows of the front pocket, capturing every vicious, delusional word. "I care about surviving," I told him, matching his glare with a cold, dead stare. "And I am not drowning to keep Brad afloat." I turned on my heel and walked out of the kitchen. Patty called my name, a frantic, high-pitched wail, but Dale barked at her to let me go, claiming I would come crawling back when I realized how petty I was being. I walked through the immaculate foyer, past the framed photographs of the golden boy, and pushed the heavy oak door open. Stepping back into the suffocating August heat, I felt a strange, terrifying clarity wash over me. I marched past the gleaming black F-250 parked in the driveway, refusing to look at the luxury vehicle my stolen future had purchased. Opening my car door, I slid into the driver's seat and locked the doors. I sat in the silence, staring at the manicured lawn. The confrontation had confirmed my darkest fear. They would never take accountability. They expected me to quietly shoulder the burden of a $95,000 felony, sacrificing my own peace to protect their grand illusion. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me from my thoughts. I pulled it out, stopping the audio recording and saving the file to a secure cloud drive. But the notification on the screen was not an email from work. It was a calendar alert. "Closing day. Tulsa property." The words mocked me. I had a choice to make. I could surrender, pay the extortion money, and spend the next 10 years chained to my brother's failure. Or I could fight back. But clearing my name meant waging a war against my own flesh and blood, a battle that threatened to destroy whatever sanity I had left. I put the car in gear and drove away, unaware that the true nightmare of this debt was just beginning to unfold. The drive back to my apartment in Oklahoma City was a blur of sun-baked asphalt and suffocating dread. The adrenaline from the kitchen confrontation faded, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache in my chest. I parked my sensible sedan in the cramped lot of my complex, staring at the faded stucco walls of the building I had lived in for 5 years. This place was only ever meant to be a stepping stone. I had endured the thin walls, the noisy upstairs neighbors, and the rattling air conditioning unit because every saved penny was a brick in the foundation of my future. Now, that future was gone. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, refreshing the dashboard. The numbers stared back at me, stark and unforgiving. The $12,000 earnest money deposit I had wired to the escrow account last month was forfeited. The contract on the Tulsa property contained a strict financing contingency clause, and my sudden, catastrophic default meant I had breached the terms. $12,000. That was a year of skipped lunches, canceled streaming subscriptions, and working grueling weekend shifts overseeing freight logistics. All of it vanished into the ether because my father decided my signature belonged to him. I opened my credit monitoring app next. A red downward arrow flashed on the screen. 150 points. My score had plummeted from a pristine 810 to a dismal 660 in a matter of days. In modern American society, your credit score is your reputation. It dictates your safety, your housing, and your reliability. My parents had taken my reputation, tied a cinder block to it, and dropped it into a bottomless lake. I walked up the 2 flights of concrete stairs to my floor, my legs feeling like lead. I just wanted to lock my door, close the blinds, and sleep until the nightmare ended. But as I approached my unit, a bright yellow sticker on the doorframe caught my eye. A delivery courier had taped a thick, rigid cardboard envelope to my door. The return address printed in the top left corner sent a fresh spike of ice through my veins. Apex Financial Recovery. My hands shook as I ripped the perforated edge of the cardboard. Inside was a stack of legal documents printed on heavy bond paper. The bold, capitalized letters at the top of the first page commanded immediate attention. Formal notice of intent to initiate legal proceedings. I leaned against my closed front door, sliding down until I sat on the cheap carpet of my entryway, reading the dense legal jargon. The lending agency was not just issuing a warning. They were escalating the collection process. The document outlined their intent to file a civil lawsuit in county court to obtain a judgment against me. Once they secured that judgment, the next paragraph explained, they would petition the state to garnish my wages. My breath hitched in my throat. Wage garnishment. In the corporate logistics sector, reputation is everything. My firm handled multi-million-dollar freight contracts for aerospace and agricultural clients. Upper management underwent routine financial background checks to ensure we were not susceptible to bribery or corporate espionage. If a debt collection agency served a court-ordered wage garnishment to my human resources department, it would not just be a personal humiliation. It would be a professional death sentence. My promotion to vice president, the role I had spent 6 years grooming myself for, would be revoked instantly. They were going to take 25% of my paycheck every single month until the $95,000 plus exorbitant late fees and legal costs was satisfied. I would spend the entire decade of my 30s paying for a luxury truck I did not own. I tossed the legal documents onto the floor. Reasoning with Dale and Patty was a lost cause. They were too deeply insulated in their own suburban delusions to comprehend the gravity of a federal crime. But Brad was the beneficiary. Brad was the one driving the gleaming black Ford F-250 around Edmond, pretending to be a successful business owner. He had to know the source of his funding. I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. The line rang 4 times before he picked up. "Hey, sis," Brad answered. His voice was bright, casual, and entirely unbothered. In the background, I could hear the rhythmic splashing of a power washer and the faint sound of country music playing from a high-end Bluetooth speaker. He was washing the stolen truck. "Brad, I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said, keeping my voice low and tight. "I just lost the house in Tulsa. The bank denied my mortgage because a $95,000 commercial loan hit my credit report. A loan with my forged signature." There was a brief pause on the line. The power washer cut off, leaving only the sound of the country music. "Oh, wow," Brad said. He did not sound shocked. He sounded like he was reacting to a minor traffic jam. "That is a huge bummer about the house, Kim. I thought Dad handled all the paperwork with the lenders. He told me he used some family leverage to get me a better interest rate. I had no idea your name was on it." He was lying. I could hear the practiced cadence in his voice, the careful choice of words designed to deflect accountability. "Do not play stupid with me," I snapped, pushing myself off the floor. "You knew your credit was wrecked. You knew Dale and Patty could not secure that kind of principal on their income. You knew exactly whose name was on that promissory note." "Whoa, dial down the hostility," Brad said, his tone shifting from casual to patronizing. "You are acting crazy right now. Look, I am sorry the timing messed up your house closing, but this detailing business is a gold mine. I just locked in 2 corporate accounts this morning. I am building a brand here. I just need time for the revenue to scale. Cash flow is a little tight in the first quarter, which is why the payment slipped. The payment slipped, I repeated, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. You are 90 days delinquent. The account is in active collections. They just served me with a notice of intent to sue. They are going to garnish my wages at the logistics firm. Brad let out a heavy sigh. The kind and exhausted parent gives a misbehaving toddler. Kim, you are overreacting. It is just a scare tactic. Those collection agencies send those letters to everyone. You have a great job. You have plenty of disposable income. Just pay the past due balance to get them off our backs, and I will reimburse you when my invoice is clear next month. I stared at the blank wall of my apartment, feeling a sickening wave of vertigo. He was reciting the exact same script my parents had used. They had rehearsed this. They had collectively agreed that my financial stability was a communal checking account they could overdraw at their convenience. You need to walk into a bank tomorrow, I told him, enunciating every single syllable. You need to take out a personal loan, secure it with that ridiculous truck, and pay off this fraudulent debt. If you do not fix this, I am going to the authorities. Brad laughed. It was a short, breathy chuckle that made my skin crawl. Come on, Kim. You are not going to the cops. That would destroy Mom and Dad. Do you know what kind of stress you are putting them under right now? Mom called me crying her eyes out because you screamed at them in their own kitchen. You need to chill out and stop stressing Mom out. Family helps family. Just spot me the $4,000 and let me run my business. He hung up. The line went dead, leaving me standing in the center of my cramped living room with the phone pressed to my ear. The sheer audacity paralyzed me. He truly believed I would fold. He believed the lifelong conditioning my parents had installed in me, the deep-seated obligation to remain quiet and compliant, would override my own instinct for survival. In their minds, I was not a victim of a crime. I was simply a malfunctioning resource that needed to be bullied back into working order. I lowered the phone, my gaze falling back to the legal documents scattered across my entryway carpet. The threat was printed in stark black and white. If I did not take drastic, legally binding action, the court would rule against me by default. I would spend the next 10 years sacrificing my paycheck, my career trajectory, and my peace of mind to fund the delusions of a mediocre man. I could not negotiate with them. You cannot reason with people who view your destruction as a minor inconvenience. I had to sever the cord entirely. I walked into my kitchen, grabbed a notebook, and began writing down the names of the top financial fraud attorneys in Oklahoma City. The illusion of the Roberts family was over. I was going to burn it down. But before I could even make my first appointment, the family decided to launch a preemptive strike, sending their most entitled soldier right to my doorstep. The next morning arrived with a brutal, aching fatigue. Sleep had eluded me entirely. I had spent the dark hours pacing my cramped apartment, turning the events over and over in my tired mind. A singular, burning conviction had taken root in my chest. Brad was the mastermind. My parents were toxic and enabling, certainly, but they lacked the sheer audacity and technical know-how to orchestrate a federal crime completely on their own. Brad had to be the one pulling the strings. He possessed a terrifying charisma, a manipulative charm he had honed since his days playing high school football. He must have convinced Dale and Patty that borrowing against my name was a temporary, harmless necessity. He played them, just like he played everyone else. I walked into my neighborhood coffee shop just blocks from the logistics firm, craving a heavy dose of caffeine before facing a grueling day of aerospace shipping manifests. The bell above the glass door chimed. The scent of roasted espresso and baked pastries usually brought me a sense of routine comfort. But today, my stomach churned with nausea. The morning rush hour crowd buzzed around me. Business professionals in tailored suits typed rapidly on their laptops, while baristas called out complicated beverage orders over the hiss of the steaming wands. I stood at the wooden counter, paid for my black drip coffee, and turned to find an empty table near the window. That was when a manicured hand clamped down hard on my forearm. The sharp acrylic nails dug painfully into my skin. I flinched, pulling my arm back, and found myself staring directly into the oversized designer sunglasses of my sister-in-law. Ashley stood there, physically blocking my path to the exit. She was wearing a matching pastel athleisure set that likely cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Her blonde hair was styled in effortless, cascading waves, the exact look she meticulously maintained for her carefully curated social media presence. Ashley was the kind of woman who posted inspirational quotes over pictures of her expensive lattes, tagging every single post with #blessed, while actively dodging phone calls from collection agencies. She had married Brad 5 years ago, seamlessly integrating herself into my parents' culture of relentless denial and suburban entitlement. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice low and steady. Ashley pulled off her sunglasses, revealing eyes narrowed with simmering hostility. "We need to talk right now, Kim," she hissed, stepping closer to invade my personal space. The scent of her heavy floral perfume was overwhelming. "Brad came home last night completely devastated. You called him screaming like a lunatic, demanding money we do not have. You are harassing my husband, and I am not going to stand by and let you ruin his mental health." I stared at her, genuinely stunned by the aggressive inversion of reality. "Harassing him," I repeated, ensuring my tone remained ice cold. "My mortgage was denied yesterday morning. A collection agency is threatening to garnish my corporate wages because your husband is 90 days delinquent on a $95,000 commercial loan. A loan bearing my forged electronic signature." Ashley scoffed, rolling her eyes as if I had just complained about a minor inconvenience, like finding a scratch on my bumper. "Oh, please," she sneered, crossing her arms over her chest and shifting her weight to one hip. "Stop acting like such a martyr. Dale told us you are throwing a gigantic fit over a temporary credit dip. You are so jealous of Brad. You always have been. He is finally building a real brand, a luxury company that is going to secure our future, and you simply cannot handle the fact that he is succeeding without your help." I gripped my cardboard coffee cup. The heat seeped through the corrugated sleeve, burning my palm, but the physical pain grounded me. "Succeeding?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "He bought a heavy-duty detailing truck using stolen money. He committed corporate identity theft." "Do not use those ugly words," Ashley snapped, glancing around nervously to ensure no one at the neighboring tables was listening to our conversation. "Nobody stole anything from you. Dale utilized family resources to secure a better interest rate. That is what families do, Kim. They support each other. You sit up in your fancy high-rise office, making a lucrative salary, judging us from your pedestal. You do not have children to worry about. You do not have a husband. You do not have the heavy responsibilities that Brad and I carry every single day." She took a step closer, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "Taking on this little financial burden should not be a big deal for someone in your position. You have plenty of disposable income. You are just being incredibly selfish." I looked at the woman standing before me and felt a profound, chilling clarity wash away the last remnants of my anger. There was no misunderstanding here. There was no ignorance. Ashley knew exactly where the money came from, and she did not care. As long as she could sit in the passenger seat of a gleaming luxury vehicle, maintaining her wealthy suburban facade for her internet followers, she was perfectly content letting my life burn to ash. "Do you know what happens when a bank uncovers wire fraud, Ashley?" I asked quietly. She blinked, her arrogant posture faltering for a mere fraction of a second. "They do not care about your social media aesthetic," I continued, stepping around her. "They care about recovering their capital, and they will repossess every single thing you own to get it back. I walked toward the exit, ignoring her sudden, sputtering protests. Family helps family, she called out after me, her voice rising in a desperate, frantic pitch that turned a few heads in the cafe. You are supposed to help us. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped out into the humid morning air, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the crowded coffee shop, defending a felony to a room full of strangers. Have you ever been expected to set yourself on fire just to keep your family warm? Let me know down in the comments below. Because in that coffee shop, a very painful pebble dropped into the quiet pond of my mind. The confrontation stripped away any lingering illusions I held about my relatives. No one in the Roberts family saw me as a human being. I was not a sister, a daughter, or a person deserving of basic respect. I was nothing more than an unsecured line of credit, a disposable asset to be plundered whenever their fragile egos required a fresh infusion of cash. Walking the remaining 2 blocks to my logistics firm, my strategy shifted entirely. Trying to appeal to their sense of morality was a complete waste of time. They possessed no morality, only a feral instinct to preserve their unearned status. I could not negotiate with parasites. I had to sever the host. I walked into my office building, bypassed the elevator, and headed straight for the stairwell to clear my head. Reaching my desk, I opened my laptop and began searching for a legal specialist in financial crimes. If my family wanted to treat my life like a corporate asset, I was going to show them exactly how a ruthless corporate executive handles a hostile takeover. But to mount a proper defense, I needed to gather every single piece of documentation tied to that loan. I needed the concrete paper trail. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of a prominent local attorney, entirely unaware that the evidence I was about to uncover would prove my entire theory about Brad completely wrong. The real mastermind was hiding in plain sight, and the scope of the betrayal was about to multiply. I returned to my office and closed the heavy glass door, shutting out the ambient noise of the logistics bullpen. My encounter with Ashley at the coffee shop had stripped away any lingering illusions. There was no misunderstanding to clear up, no moral high ground to reach through earnest conversation. They viewed my life as a communal asset, and they would drain it until there was nothing left. I took a deep breath, forcing the frantic beating of my heart to slow. In my line of work, when $1 million shipment of aerospace components goes missing, you do not sit on the floor and cry. You do not ask the thieves nicely to return the cargo. You audit the supply chain, you track the digital footprints, you shift into survival mode. I decided to treat my stolen identity like a compromised freight manifest. My first step was securing legal representation. I spent my lunch hour researching financial crime specialists in Oklahoma City, eventually securing a consultation with a seasoned attorney named Pierce. Retaining his services required a steep upfront fee. I wired the money from my savings account, watching another chunk of my hard-earned independence vanish. The sting was sharp, but the alternative was far worse. I spent the next 4 evenings transforming my dining room table into a war room. I contacted the fraud department at Apex Financial Recovery, bypassing the low-level collection agents and demanding the full digital packet associated with the promissory note. They resisted initially, citing privacy protocols, but a sharply worded email from Pierce on official letterhead forced their hand. A secure portal link arrived in my inbox, containing every single keystroke, IP address, and timestamp associated with the $95,000 debt. I printed everything. I bought highlighters, sticky notes, and a whiteboard, mapping out the timeline of my own financial assassination. The data painted a damning, irrefutable picture. The digital signature authorizing the loan was executed from an internet service provider assigned to my parents' residential address in Edmond. The timestamp read October 14th at 2:15 in the afternoon. I pictured my father, Dale, sitting in his locked home office with the blinds drawn, sipping his iced tea while casually typing my social security number into a banking portal. He had meticulously checked the boxes, accepted the terms and conditions, and bound my future to his son's failure. He did it all while I was sitting in a Dallas conference room, negotiating contracts to build the very life he was stealing from me. Armed with a thick binder of evidence, I drove to Pierce's downtown office on Thursday afternoon. The suite smelled of old paper, leather, and expensive cologne. I sat across from his wide glass desk and slid the binder toward him. I felt a surge of vindication. I had done the legwork. I had proven the fraud. I expected Pierce to smile, pick up the phone, and make the nightmare end. Instead, Pierce opened the binder, reviewed my highlighted timelines, and let out a heavy sigh. His expression was sobering, devoid of any celebratory relief. "The evidence is thorough, Kim," Pierce said, closing the binder and folding his hands. "But you need to understand how the banking industry views this specific type of situation. When a stranger in another country steals your identity, creditors act swiftly to rectify the breach. But when the signature originates from your hometown, from an IP address linked to your immediate family members, they categorize it as friendly fraud." I frowned, the term leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. Friendly fraud. There is nothing friendly about this. They stole my name. "The law does not care about your emotional boundaries," Pierce replied, his voice maintaining a calm, clinical cadence. "To the lender, this looks like a classic case of buyer's remorse. They see a sister who willingly co-signed a loan to help her struggling brother. They assume you got cold feet when the business failed and the account hit collections, and now you are claiming identity theft to dodge the financial bullet. Without a formal legal intervention, Apex Financial Recovery will proceed with the civil lawsuit. They will garnish your corporate wages by the end of the quarter." A cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck. "So what is the next step?" I asked, gripping the padded armrests of my chair. "How do I prove I did not authorize this?" "You have to cross a line that most people are terrified to cross," Pierce said, leaning forward. "A civil dispute will not freeze the collection process. The only way to stop the wage garnishment, clear the debt, and salvage your credit score is to file a sworn fraud affidavit with the Federal Trade Commission and file a formal police report with the local authorities. You have to name Dale and Patty Roberts as the primary suspects in a criminal investigation." The air vanished from my lungs. The sterile walls of the law office seemed to press inward. "A police report," I whispered, the reality of his words crashing over me. "You mean criminal charges?" "Federal wire fraud, identity theft, and bank fraud," Pierce confirmed, his gaze unwavering. "These are not minor infractions, Kim. These carry mandatory minimum sentences. If you sign that affidavit, you trigger an investigation that is entirely out of your hands. The state will prosecute. Your parents could face significant prison time." I drove home in a daze. The Oklahoma sky painted in bruised shades of purple and orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. The traffic on the highway was a blur of headlights and brake lights. My hands felt numb on the steering wheel. I had walked into that law office seeking a shield, and Pierce had handed me a loaded weapon, pointing it directly at the people who raised me. I spent the entire night pacing the cramped confines of my apartment. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic racing of my own thoughts. The lifelong conditioning my parents had installed in me flared up with a terrifying, paralyzing intensity. I remembered every holiday dinner, every birthday, every rare moment I had desperately craved their fleeting approval. They had wired my brain from childhood to believe that their comfort was my ultimate responsibility. Whenever Brad broke a window, I was expected to help clean up the glass. Whenever Dale lost his temper, I was expected to stay quiet and keep the peace. I was the designated shock absorber for a family that refused to navigate around the potholes of life. Sending them to federal prison felt like an unimaginable betrayal. My mind spiraled into a vortex of catastrophic guilt. I pictured Patty crying in a courtroom. I pictured Dale, stripped of his arrogant pride, sitting in a holding cell. I pictured the extended family, the neighbors, the community whispering about the vindictive daughter who destroyed her own parents over money. I sank down onto my cheap living room rug, pulling my knees to my chest. I grabbed a calculator and a notepad from the coffee table. My hands shook as I began running the numbers. If I lived on a strict, punishing budget, I could make it work. If I canceled my retirement contributions, sold my reliable car for a cheaper model, and stopped dining out entirely, I could afford the minimum monthly payments on the $95,000 loan. I would have to delay buying a house for another decade. I would have to live in this cramped apartment, working grueling hours, funneling every spare cent toward Brad's luxury truck. But it would keep the peace. It would protect them. It would spare me the agonizing guilt of tearing my family apart. I stared at the ceiling as the first rays of morning light began to filter through the vinyl blinds. Tears of sheer exhaustion burned my eyes, spilling hot and fast down my cheeks. I was on the brink of surrender. The psychological weight of defying my conditioning was too heavy to carry. I reached for my phone on the coffee table, resolving to call the collection agency right then and there. I would set up a payment plan. I would swallow the injustice, absorb the financial blow, and let them win. It was the only way to survive the crushing guilt. My fingers brushed the screen, ready to dial the toll-free number. But before I could unlock the device, a bright banner notification flashed across the glass display, vibrating violently against the wood of the table. It was an automated alert from my credit monitoring service. A new inquiry had just been posted to my profile. I froze, the tears drying on my face. I opened the application, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The alert detailed a fresh, hard credit pull initiated just minutes ago. Someone was attempting to open a high-limit corporate credit card in my name. The location of the inquiry was traced directly to the Edmond zip code. The crushing guilt evaporated, replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated fury. They were not sorry. They were not scared. They were just getting started. And as I dug into the details of this new credit inquiry, I uncovered a horrifying truth hidden in the fine print of the original loan documents. A revelation that proved the betrayal was far more sinister than I had ever imagined. The harsh glow of my smartphone screen cut through the dim morning shadows of my living room. I stared at the new notification, my thumb hovering frozen over the glass display. Just moments ago, I had been ready to surrender. I had been seconds away from calling the collection agency to set up a payment plan, willing to chain myself to a decade of financial servitude just to protect my parents from federal prison. I had let a lifetime of psychological conditioning convince me that their comfort was worth my destruction. But this new alert shattered that fragile illusion into a million jagged pieces. A major financial institution was processing an application for a corporate platinum card. The requested credit limit was $25,000. The applicant name was Kimberly Roberts, but the mailing address traced straight back to that immaculate brick house in Edmond. My grief evaporated. The suffocating weight of daughterly guilt vanished, replaced by a sudden, razor-sharp adrenaline spike. They were not satisfied with ruining my mortgage. They were not cowering in fear after my confrontation at the kitchen island. Dale had interpreted my silence over the last 2 days as submission. He thought he had won. He believed I was too weak to fight back, so he was actively digging his claws deeper into my identity to extract even more capital. I threw my phone onto the sofa and scrambled off the floor. I practically ran to my dining room table, where the thick binder of printed documents from Apex Financial Recovery still sat undisturbed. I had spent days agonizing over the promissory note and the forged signature, focusing entirely on the debt itself. but I had neglected to read the dense, peripheral paperwork nestled at the back of the digital file packet. I flipped past the collection notices, the interest rate schedules, and the payment history. I reached a section labeled State Incorporation Filings. The paper felt heavy, slick under my fingertips as I spread the pages across the dark wood of my table. My eyes scanned the legal jargon, and the breath hitched painfully in my throat. The $95,000 debt was not a personal loan. It was not a simple auto financing agreement. Dale had submitted official documentation to the state of Oklahoma to form a limited liability company. The registered business name, printed in bold black ink, was Roberts Luxury Detailing, LLC. I traced my finger down the page to the section designating the ownership structure. There was no mention of Brad. There was no mention of Dale as a managing partner. Listed as the sole proprietor, the registered agent, and the chief executive officer holding 100% of the ownership equity was Kimberly Roberts. A wave of profound nausea washed over me. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Dale had not merely co-signed a loan using my excellent credit score. He had executed a full-scale corporate identity theft. He had tied my Social Security number to a newly generated employer identification number. He had submitted forged tax documents to federal agencies. Brad was not the owner of that gleaming black Ford truck parked in my parents' driveway. Brad was legally nothing more than an unlisted operator or a phantom employee. According to the state government, the bank, and the Internal Revenue Service, I owned the detailing business. I owned the commercial equipment. I owned the truck. The ramifications crashed into me with the force of a freight train. If Brad failed to pay quarterly business taxes, the federal government would audit me. If Brad drove that heavy-duty power washing rig through a red light and injured someone, the victims would sue the LLC, holding me directly liable for the damages. My father had not just stolen my money. He had built a ticking time bomb of legal and financial ruin, tied it directly to my name, and handed the detonator to my irresponsible brother. The puzzle pieces of my family dynamic shifted, forming a horrifying new picture. I had spent the last 48 hours operating under a false assumption. I had believed Brad was the mastermind. I thought his terrifying charisma had manipulated Dale and Patty into facilitating the fraud. But Brad was not smart enough to navigate state incorporation laws, secure federal tax numbers, and execute a stealthy digital forgery using virtual private networks. Brad could barely remember to renew his vehicle registration. The architect of this nightmare was Dale. My father had spent his entire adult life working as a middle manager for an oil services firm. He pushed papers for wealthy executives, harboring a deep, simmering resentment that he was never the boss. He possessed a fragile ego and a desperate craving for status, but he lacked the courage to risk his own assets to build a company from the ground up. Furthermore, his own credit was bruised from years of financing Patty's lavish lifestyle and bailing Brad out of petty troubles. When Brad pitched the luxury detailing venture, Dale saw an opportunity to finally play the role of a big-shot corporate investor. But he needed a pristine financial host to incubate his ambition. He needed a legal shield. He looked at his hard-working, independent daughter and saw nothing but raw material. He used my immaculate credit history to secure premium commercial rates that he could never qualify for himself. He weaponized my spotless background to bypass the strict underwriting processes. Dale orchestrated the entire corporate hijacking to cover his own inadequacies, sacrificing my future to construct a monument to his own ego. And now, assuming I was too paralyzed by family loyalty to retaliate, he was attempting to open a $25,000 corporate credit line to fund their ongoing charade. The phone on the sofa buzzed again. Another automated message. The credit card application was moving into the final underwriting phase. I stared at the screen, feeling a strange, absolute calm settle over my mind. The internal war that had kept me awake for 3 days was over. You cannot negotiate with a parasite that is actively trying to consume its host. Protecting the people who raised me was no longer an option, because those people did not actually exist. The parents I thought I had were an illusion. In their place stood two ruthless thieves wearing familiar faces. I walked into my bedroom and pulled a structured navy blazer from my closet. I dressed quickly, replacing my sleepwear with the armor I wore to high-stakes corporate negotiations. I tied my hair back into a severe knot, checked my reflection in the mirror, and recognized the cold, hardened executive staring back at me. I returned to the dining room, gathered every single piece of paper into a neat stack, and slid the evidence into a hard plastic briefcase. I grabbed my car keys, ignoring the fatigue that had previously weighed down my limbs. My step was light, fueled by a searing, focused determination. I marched out of my apartment, locked the door, and descended the concrete stairs to the parking lot. The morning sun was just cresting over the rooftops, painting the Oklahoma sky in brilliant streaks of gold and crimson. The humidity was already rising, but the air felt crisp and clean in my lungs. I started the engine of my sedan, ignoring the usual route toward the logistics firm. Instead, I merged onto the highway, navigating the morning traffic with clinical precision. The drive took less than 20 minutes, but it felt like traversing a chasm between two entirely different lives. I pulled into the sprawling parking lot of the Oklahoma City Police Precinct. The building was an imposing structure of gray concrete and tinted glass, a stark contrast to the manicured suburban utopia my parents inhabited. I parked the car, turned off the ignition, and sat in the silence of the cabin for one brief moment. Filing this report meant pushing a domino that would inevitably crush the Roberts family. It meant federal investigations, subpoenas, and the total destruction of their social standing. It meant crossing a line of no return. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A final alert from the monitoring service. The fraudulent corporate credit card had been conditionally approved. I did not hesitate. I opened the car door, grabbed my briefcase full of evidence, and walked purposefully toward the heavy glass doors of the police station. I was ready to introduce Dale and Patty to the devastating reality of the real world, starting with the Financial Crimes Division. As I approached the entrance, the automatic doors slid open, releasing a blast of frigid, recycled air. The lobby was stark, illuminated by harsh fluorescent lighting that cast long, unnatural shadows against the linoleum floor. The air smelled of stale coffee, industrial floor wax, and tension. A few people sat in molded plastic chairs, waiting for their numbers to be called, looking exhausted and defeated. I did not take a seat. I bypassed the waiting area and walked directly to the thick, bulletproof glass partition separating the public from the duty desk. A uniformed officer looked up from his computer monitor, his expression bored and expectant. I slid my driver's license under the metal slot at the bottom of the glass. I adjusted my grip on the heavy briefcase, feeling the solid weight of the incorporation papers, the digital IP logs, and the forged promissory note. I need to speak with a detective in the Financial Crimes Division, I told the officer, my voice carrying clear and steady through the small speaker embedded in the glass. I am the victim of a sophisticated corporate identity theft, and the perpetrators are currently attempting to open additional fraudulent credit lines in my name. The officer glanced at my license, then looked up at my face, sensing the absolute resolve radiating from my posture. He nodded, picked up a desk phone, and dialed a brief extension. "Have a seat," he instructed, handing my identification back through the metal slot. "A detective will be out to collect your statement in just a minute." I took my card, turned away from the desk, and stood in the center of the room. The hesitation was gone, replaced by a terrifying clarity. The war had officially started, and I was about to fire the first devastating shot. The air inside the precinct was stale, thick with the scent of industrial floor wax and anxious sweat. I sat in a molded plastic chair in the lobby for a mere 10 minutes before a heavy wooden door swung open. A man in a rumpled gray suit holding a manila folder stepped into the sterile reception area. He called my name. Detective Miller had the tired, shadowed eyes of a man who spent his days dissecting the darkest corners of human deception. He led me through a maze of gray cubicles to a small, windowless interview room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh, unforgiving glare on the scratched metal table sitting between us. I placed my hard plastic briefcase on the table. The metallic snap of the latches echoed sharply in the quiet room. I pulled out the thick stack of documents, sliding the paperwork across the scuffed surface. I did not cry. I did not tremble. I presented the timeline with the clinical precision of a logistics director auditing a corrupted supply chain. I showed him the promissory note from Apex Financial Recovery. I provided the internet protocol logs mapping the digital signature directly to my parents' home network in Edmond. Then, I revealed the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. I laid the state incorporation filings for Robert's luxury detailing flat on the table, pointing a steady finger at my own name listed as the sole proprietor and chief executive. Miller stopped writing on his yellow legal pad. He picked up the corporate registration, his tired eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. He lowered the paper and looked at me, a flicker of genuine shock piercing his hardened exterior. "Your father did not just co-sign a bad loan," Miller said, his voice dropping to a low, serious register. "He hijacked your identity to establish a phantom corporation. He exposed you to unlimited corporate liability. If his son injures someone in that commercial vehicle, the victims come after you." I nodded, keeping my gaze locked on his. "That is why I am sitting in this chair, Detective." Miller leaned back in his metal chair. The hinges squeaked in loud protest. "Kimberly, before we proceed any further, I have to give you a harsh reality check. I deal with family disputes all the time. People get angry, they file reports, and 3 days later they come back to my desk crying. They want to drop the charges because they feel guilty about sending their mother or their brother to jail." He leaned forward again, resting his forearms on the table. "I need you to understand the scale of the evidence you just handed me. The dollar amount alone makes this severe. Factoring in the use of internet service providers to execute the forgery, the creation of a fictitious business entity, and the ongoing attempts to secure additional credit lines, this elevates the crime out of local jurisdiction. Once I enter these documents into the law enforcement database, it triggers automatic alerts with the Federal Trade Commission and the regional FBI field office. The state takes over the prosecution. You cannot withdraw the complaint tomorrow because you feel guilty. If I file this affidavit, your parents are looking at federal indictments, severe financial restitution, and probable prison time." I stared at the blank affidavit resting near his hand. For a fleeting second, the ghostly echo of my childhood conditioning whispered in my ear. The programmed urge to keep the peace, to absorb the damage so Dale and Patty could maintain their pristine suburban facade, tugged at my conscience. But then I remembered the lost dream house in Tulsa. I remembered Ashley sneering at me in the coffee shop, demanding I finance her luxury lifestyle while she paraded around on social media. I remembered Dale sipping his iced tea, dismissing a felony as a minor inconvenience, and calling me a selfish daughter for refusing to pay his extortion fee. Filing this report felt exactly like slicing off an infected limb. The surgical procedure is brutal, and the physical loss is permanent, but leaving the gangrene attached guarantees the poison will spread and kill the rest of the body. To survive, you have to sever the rot. I reached across the scratched metal table and picked up his heavy pen. I clicked the top, pressed the ballpoint to the signature line at the bottom of the affidavit, and signed my name. My hand did not shake. The ink flowed dark, sharp, and decisive. "Thank you, Detective," I said, pushing the signed document back to him. Miller nodded, his expression grim but respectful. He handed me a business card with a freshly stamped case number written across the back. I walked out of the interview room, navigated the maze of gray cubicles, and pushed through the heavy glass doors of the precinct lobby. The Oklahoma heat hit me like a physical blow, a stark contrast to the frigid, sterile air inside the station. I climbed into the driver's seat of my sedan and locked the doors. The relief was instantaneous, a sudden lightening of the crushing pressure that had suffocated me for days. The legal shield was officially in place. No one could garnish my wages now. But trailing closely behind that profound relief was a creeping dread. The fallout was imminent, and the blast radius was going to be enormous. I started the engine and picked up my phone. I dialed the direct extension for the fraud investigator at Apex Financial Recovery. When the agent answered, I did not waste time with pleasantries. "I have a formal police report regarding the $95,000 default," I stated, reading the digits off the back of the detective's business card. The agent typed rapidly on his keyboard. A moment later, his tone shifted from suspicious to highly cooperative. "Thank you, Ms. Roberts. I am attaching the police report to your file now. All collection efforts against you, including the pending civil lawsuit and wage garnishment petitions, are suspended, effectively immediately, pending the outcome of the federal investigation." I ended the call, placed the car in gear, and drove back to my apartment complex. The drive was quiet, but the storm was gathering just over the horizon. The moment I shifted my vehicle into park outside my building, my phone screen illuminated with a blinding flurry of activity. The notification tray was a chaotic cascade of missed calls, text messages, and urgent voicemails. The dam had broken. I scrolled through the notifications, watching the numbers climb. 7 missed calls from Patty, 14 missed calls from Dale, 6 text messages from Brad consisting of question marks and expletives. I did not answer the new incoming call ringing in my hand. I let it go straight to voicemail, waiting for the audio file to process on the server. I tapped the play icon, routing the sound through my car speakers. Dale's voice filled the quiet cabin. He was not using his usual arrogant, dismissive tone. He was breathing heavily, his words laced with a raw, panicked fury.
"Kim, you pick up the phone right now,"
he snarled, the audio clipping from how closely he held the receiver to his mouth. "I just tried to buy gas and my debit card was declined. I called the bank and the branch manager told me both our checking and savings accounts are locked. They said there was a federal fraud hold placed on our entire portfolio, pending a police investigation." He paused, taking a ragged breath. "You actually did it. You went to the cops over a minor cash flow problem. You betrayed your own flesh and blood. You are a traitor, Kim. We are coming to your office tomorrow, and you are going to fix this, or I swear to God you will regret it." The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I sat in the quiet cabin of my car, staring at the faded stucco wall of my apartment building. My father thought he could still intimidate me into submission. He thought a few harsh words and empty threats would make me crumble, forcing me to retract the legal boundaries I had just erected. He had no idea that I had already locked the doors and set the building on fire. The silent phase of the conflict was over. The Roberts family war had officially spilled out into the open, and instead of taking accountability for their crimes, Dale and Patty were about to drag our entire extended family into the crossfire to control the narrative. The morning sun filtered through the cheap vinyl blinds of my apartment, casting long, parallel shadows across the living room floor. I woke up on the sofa, still wearing my corporate blazer from the day before. The heavy plastic briefcase containing the evidence of my ruined identity sat on the coffee table, a physical anchor to the surreal nightmare my life had become. I reached for my smartphone resting on the cushion beside me. The screen was dark, but the notification light pulsed with a frantic, rhythmic urgency. I unlocked the device, and a tidal wave of digital chaos flooded the display. My parents had spent the night mobilizing their troops. I opened my social media application first. The algorithm had already pushed Patty's latest status update to the very top of my feed. My mother treated her online presence like a carefully curated art gallery, usually posting pristine photos of her rose garden, her neighborhood association luncheons, or Brad standing next to his luxury vehicles. Today, the tone had shifted from suburban perfection to theatrical tragedy. The post was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. Patty wrote a long, rambling paragraph about the heartbreak of watching a child turn against her own blood. She typed about how she and Dale had sacrificed everything to provide a stable, loving home, only to face a cruel betrayal by a daughter they no longer recognized. She lamented that modern society was tearing families apart, and she asked her prayer circle to send strength during this season of unimaginable grief. She did not mention the $95,000 debt. She did not mention the forged signature or the phantom corporation. She merely painted herself as a weeping martyr, bleeding out on the altar of my sudden, inexplicable cruelty. Below the status, the comments section was a terrifying echo chamber of misplaced sympathy. Dozens of neighborhood friends, church acquaintances, and distant relatives offered their prayers. They validated her victimhood. They left heart emojis and expressed their deep disappointment in my character. I closed the application, my stomach churning with a cold, metallic nausea. The smear campaign was officially underway, and the speed at which the extended family rallied behind the lies was breathtaking. My email inbox chimed. The sender was my cousin Zara, a woman I had grown up alongside, sharing summer camps and holiday secrets. Her wedding was scheduled for the upcoming weekend. The subject line of the email was brief and formal. I opened the message and read the 3 short sentences she had typed. Kim, due to the distress you are causing Aunt Patty and Uncle Dale, my fiancé and I feel it is best if you do not attend our ceremony on Saturday. We want a peaceful environment to celebrate our union. Please respect our boundaries during this difficult time. I stared at the glowing words. Boundaries. My family loved to weaponize therapy language to defend their own toxic behavior, using words like boundaries to punish the very person whose actual boundaries they had just obliterated. I deleted the email, feeling a sharp pang of grief for the loss of a cousin I once loved. The isolation they were engineering was swift and surgical. The most devastating blow came through a voicemail left at 3 a.m. I pressed play, routing the audio through my phone speaker. The voice belonged to my Aunt Carol, Dale's older sister. She was weeping, her breaths hitching audibly into the receiver. "Kimberly, what are you doing?" she sobbed, her words thick with genuine anguish. "Your father called me last night. He is heartbroken. He told me everything, sweetie. He told me about the $95,000 you borrowed. He told me about the gambling addiction." I froze, the phone slipping slightly in my grip. Gambling addiction. "We can get you help, Kim," Carol continued, her voice trembling. "Dale said you lost the money on those offshore betting sites, and now you are trying to frame him and your mother to avoid paying the consequences. He said you even went to the police to file a fake report against him. Please, honey, you are spiraling. Drop these ridiculous charges. We will pool our money. We will find a rehabilitation center. Just stop tearing this family apart." The voicemail ended with a wet, choked sob. I sat in the silence of my apartment, letting the sheer audacity of my father's lie wash over me. It was a brilliant, insidious fabrication. A gambling addiction perfectly explained the astronomical sum of $95,000. It explained why I had lost my mortgage closing. It cast my police report as the erratic, desperate lashing out of a severe addict trying to dodge accountability. Best of all, it positioned Dale and Patty as the tragic, heroic parents, desperately trying to save their troubled daughter from her own destructive vices. He was rewriting my reality for an audience that possessed no critical thinking skills. The Roberts family operated like a hive mind, prioritizing the illusion of respectability over the messy, uncomfortable truth. Dale knew exactly which strings to pull to orchestrate my total excommunication. A fierce, burning temptation rose in my chest. My fingers twitched over the keyboard of my phone. I wanted to draft a massive group message. I wanted to attach the PDF files of the forged promissory note, the internet protocol logs, and the state incorporation documents naming me as the chief executive of Brad's luxury detailing business. I wanted to scream the truth into the digital void, forcing Aunt Carol, Cousin Sarah, and the entire neighborhood association to look at the undeniable proof of my father's felony. I typed out the first sentence. Then I stopped. I stared at the blinking cursor, a sudden realization chilling my blood. Arguing with a smear campaign is like fighting a house fire with a squirt gun. Defending myself would only feed their narrative. If I engaged, I would look frantic. I would look defensive. I would look exactly like the spiraling gambling addict Dale had invented. They did not want the truth. They wanted the drama. They wanted the chaotic back and forth to muddy the waters, reducing a federal financial crime into a petty family squabble. I hit the backspace key, deleting the drafted response. I turned off my social media notifications. I blocked Cousin Sarah's email address. I deleted Aunt Carol's weeping voicemail without saving it. I chose total, impenetrable radio silence. The power of silence against a narcissist is profound. They crave your reaction. They feed on your desperate attempts to clear your name. By refusing to enter the arena, you starve them of their supply. A grim smile touched the corners of my mouth as I pictured my father at that exact moment. I could see Dale, sitting at his pristine granite kitchen island in Edmond. He was likely drinking his iced tea, refreshing his phone screen every few seconds to bask in the validation of his extended family. He was reading the sympathetic text messages, absorbing the praise, gloating about his own tactical genius. He honestly believed he had checkmated me. He thought that by controlling the family narrative, he had neutralized the threat. He viewed public opinion as the highest court in the land. He had no idea how the real world operated. While Dale was busy counting his Facebook likes and spinning tales of offshore betting, Detective Miller was sitting at a scratched metal desk in the Financial Crimes Unit. The detective was actively logging Dale's home internet protocol address into a federal law enforcement database. The state prosecution machinery was grinding into motion, cold, blind to suburban gossip, and entirely focused on the paper trail. Dale was building a castle out of sand, completely oblivious to the legal tsunami forming just offshore. My silence stretched through the weekend. I went for long runs. I drank my coffee. I prepped my logistics reports for the upcoming week. Every missed call, every frantic text message bouncing off my blocked number was a testament to their growing panic, because the silence was infuriating them. My lack of reaction disrupted Dale's script. He expected me to call him weeping, begging for forgiveness, pleading with him to tell Aunt Carol the truth. He expected me to negotiate my surrender to win back my invitation to the family wedding. When the weekend passed and I remained a ghost, his triumphant text messages shifted in tone. The words on my blocked message filter grew sharper, more unhinged. The polite, tragic father act dropped, revealing the tyrant underneath. Since he could not reach me digitally, and since he could not manipulate me emotionally, Dale decided it was time to escalate the warfare. He realized that isolating me from the extended family was not enough to force my compliance. He needed to threaten the one thing I valued more than anything else. He needed to destroy my livelihood. I woke up on Thursday morning, ironed my tailored blazer, and drove to my corporate office entirely unaware that Dale and Patty were already speeding down the highway, aiming their desperation directly at my career. Thursday morning arrived with the sterile, air-conditioned hum of the corporate world. I had spent the last 4 days insulated by silence, shielding myself from the frantic digital barrage my family had unleashed. Inside the glass and steel walls of the logistics firm, I was not the ungrateful daughter or the fictional gambling addict. I was the director of operations. I wore a tailored charcoal suit, my hair secured in a tight twist, and I carried a tablet loaded with supply chain metrics. At 10 in the morning, I stood at the head of our primary executive boardroom. 7 representatives from a major aerospace manufacturer sat around the long mahogany table. We were finalizing a lucrative quarterly contract to transport aviation turbines across the Midwestern supply routes. The atmosphere was serious, professional, and entirely under my control. I pulled up a localized route map on the overhead projector, preparing to explain our contingency protocols for inclement weather. The flashing red light on the boardroom console interrupted my presentation. It was the emergency internal intercom, a line reserved exclusively for building evacuations or critical executive matters. My superior, the vice president of regional transit, frowned from his seat near the window. I tapped the blinking button, keeping my posture relaxed to project unbothered confidence. Kimberly, the voice of our front desk receptionist, trembled through the speaker, sounding thin and panicked. I am so sorry to interrupt the aerospace summit. There is a situation in the main atrium. 2 individuals bypassed the lower security desk by following a courier through the revolving doors. They are demanding to see you. They are causing a very loud disturbance. A cold prickle of dread traced the ridges of my spine, but my face remained an impassive mask. Did they give their names? I asked, though I already knew the answer. They claim to be your parents, the receptionist whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet boardroom. The man is shouting. He says he needs to speak to the thief who ruined his life. The executives around the table exchanged uncomfortable glances. The vice president shifted in his leather chair, his brow furrowed in confusion. The safe, structured sanctuary I had built for myself was being invaded. Dale and Patty had realized that blocking their phone numbers and ignoring their social media theater had rendered them powerless. So they decided to bring their suburban circus directly into my professional arena. They intended to weaponize public humiliation, believing I would surrender to their demands just to avoid a scene in front of my corporate clients. Please excuse me for a brief moment, gentlemen, I told the aerospace representatives, smoothing the front of my charcoal jacket. A minor logistical error requires my signature at the front desk. I stepped out of the boardroom and pulled the heavy glass door shut behind me. The moment the latch clicked into place, I dropped the polite hostess smile. I walked down the carpeted hallway toward the main atrium, my heels striking the floor with rhythmic, deliberate force. I did not feel fear. I felt a profound, clarifying anger. The main atrium of our firm featured soaring ceilings and polished marble floors designed to impress visiting shareholders. Sound carried easily in the cavernous space. Long before I rounded the corner, I heard my father's voice booming off the stone walls.
I want her out here right now!
Dale bellowed. His voice was ragged, stripped of his usual composed arrogance. She works for you, but she is a criminal. You people are harboring a thief. I stepped into the open lobby. The scene unfolding was a pathetic display of desperate entitlement. Dale stood near the curved reception desk, his face flushed a deep, mottled red. He was wearing a golf shirt and khaki slacks, his weekend attire looking absurdly out of place among the sharp business suits of my colleagues. Patty stood slightly behind him, clutching her designer handbag against her chest like a shield. She was already weeping, deploying her practiced tears for the benefit of the bewildered employees frozen in the nearby corridors. Dale spotted me standing near the hallway entrance. His eyes widened, flashing with a manic, triumphant energy. He pointed a thick finger directly at my chest and marched across the marble floor.
There she is!
Dale shouted, ensuring his voice carried to every corner of the atrium.
There is traitor!
I did not shrink back. I did not rush forward to hush him. I stood perfectly still, letting him cross the distance, forcing him to enter my domain. "You thought you could just ignore us," Dale sneered, stopping mere inches from my face. "You thought you could file a fake police report and just hide in your fancy office while the banks freeze my retirement accounts. You are going to march back into that precinct today and withdraw those lies." I looked at the man who had raised me, searching for any trace of a father. There was nothing left. There was only a terrified, cornered animal trying to bare its teeth. "I am not withdrawing anything," I said, keeping my voice low, forcing him to strain to hear me over his own heavy breathing. Dale leaned closer, a malicious grin twisting his features. "Oh, really? Because I think your boss would be very interested to know that his director of operations is currently under federal investigation for a $95,000 financial fraud. I will walk right into that boardroom. I will tell every single one of your clients that you are a degenerate gambler drowning in debt. We will see how long you keep this fancy job when Human Resources finds out you are being investigated by the authorities." He was using the exact same tactic he had deployed with Aunt Carol and the neighborhood association. He believed he could twist the narrative. He thought that by loudly declaring I was the one under investigation, the corporate management would panic and terminate my employment to avoid a scandal. He thought he held the ultimate power to ruin my career, just as he had ruined my mortgage. I looked past his shoulder. The two building security guards had arrived via the freight elevator and were jogging cautiously across the marble floor. I raised my hand, catching the eye of the lead guard, and gave a sharp, commanding nod. I returned my gaze to Dale. I let a cold, genuine smile touch the corners of my mouth. "I am not the subject of that federal investigation, Dale," I told him, enunciating every syllable with crisp, surgical precision. "You are." The malicious grin on his face faltered. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, forcing him to step back. "You forged a federal document. You stole my identity. You committed corporate wire fraud." Patty gasped, her fake weeping stumbling into genuine shock. "Keep your voice down, Kim," she hissed, looking around frantically at the dozens of employees watching the spectacle unfold. I ignored her, keeping my eyes locked on the sudden, creeping panic blooming in my father's expression. "You came into my place of business to threaten me?" I continued, my voice echoing clearly across the polished stone. "You are trespassing. Leave this building right now, or I will add a restraining order to your corporate fraud charges." The color drained from Dale's face in a single, rapid rush. The mottled red flushed away, leaving a sickly, pale gray. He realized in that agonizing second that his social theater held no power here. My colleagues were not his gullible neighborhood friends. They were corporate professionals, watching a deranged man threaten a respected executive. The illusion he had tried to weaponize against me had failed. The two security guards flanked my parents. The lead guard placed a firm, unyielding hand on Dale's shoulder. "Sir, you need to vacate the premises immediately," the guard stated, his tone brooking no argument. "If you do not walk out those doors, law enforcement will be dispatched to escort you." Dale opened his mouth to argue, but the words died in his throat. The reality of his physical removal crashed down upon him. The security guards guided him firmly toward the revolving glass doors. Patty followed close behind, her head bowed in profound humiliation, using her designer handbag to shield her face from the stares of my coworkers. As the guards pushed him toward the exit, Dale dug his heels into the marble floor, turning back to face me one last time. The fear in his eyes had morphed into a desperate, feral rage. "You have nothing," Dale screamed, his voice cracking with the strain. "You think the cops care about a few pieces of paper? I shredded the mail. I destroyed the tablet I used to sign those documents. I wiped the hard drives. You have zero physical proof I did anything. It is your word against mine, and you are going to lose everything." The revolving doors caught his final words, slicing them off as the guards pushed him out into the sweltering Oklahoma heat. I stood in the quiet atrium, listening to the soft murmur of my colleagues returning to their desks. The confrontation was over. The physical threat was removed. I smoothed the front of my charcoal jacket, took a deep breath, and walked back toward the executive boardroom to secure my aerospace contract. But Dale's parting threat echoed in my mind, a dark and insidious seed taking root. He had destroyed the physical evidence. The Internet protocol logs showed the digital signature originated from his house, but a skilled defense attorney could argue that someone else had accessed their unsecured wireless network. Without a direct confession connecting Dale to the forgery, the criminal case could easily devolve into a messy, prolonged civil dispute. My father thought his arrogant confession on his way out the door was a final, devastating blow to my resolve. He thought destroying the tablet made him invincible. He had no idea that his desperate need to gloat had just handed me the exact strategy I needed to trap him permanently. I returned to the executive boardroom, smoothing the lapels of my charcoal blazer. My pulse hummed a frantic rhythm against the collar of my silk blouse, but my face remained an unreadable mask. The aerospace representatives sat around the mahogany table, exchanging uneasy glances following the disruption in the atrium. I picked up my laser pointer, directed a calm smile toward the lead client, and resumed my presentation on severe weather supply chain contingencies. I closed the logistics contract 45 minutes later. We finalized a lucrative quarterly transit agreement, shook hands, and I escorted the executives to the private elevator bay. The moment the polished steel doors slid shut, sealing the client safely inside, my professional armor cracked. I retreated to my corner office, locked the door, and sank into my ergonomic chair. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the lobby confrontation evaporated, leaving behind a chilling residue of doubt. Dale had shouted his parting threat for the entire corporate firm to hear, but his words were meant exclusively for me. He claimed he had shredded the physical mail, destroyed the tablet used to forge the documents, and wiped the local hard drives. I picked up my desk phone and dialed Pierce, my retained financial crimes attorney. The line clicked, and his deep, measured voice filled the receiver. I relayed every detail of the lobby confrontation, repeating my father's parting words verbatim. A heavy, troubling silence stretched across the line. "That is a significant complication, Kim," Pierce finally said, the clinical detachment in his tone sending a fresh spike of dread through my veins. "The Internet protocol logs you provided map the digital signature to their residential router in Edmond. In a logical world, that points directly to Dale, but the justice system requires a higher threshold of definitive proof." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. "But the location data matches their house. How is that not enough proof?" "Proximity does not equal execution," Pierce explained, the sound of rustling legal pads echoing through the speaker. "A skilled defense lawyer will argue that Dale runs an unsecured wireless network. They will claim a neighbor, a rogue hacker, or even an opportunistic passerby accessed their signal to commit the forgery. If your father truly destroyed the physical tablet and wiped the local network drives, we lack the smoking gun. Without the device holding the metadata of the transaction, reasonable doubt exists." My stomach plummeted. So, what happens next? "The state investigators might hesitate to press federal indictments on circumstantial digital evidence," Pierce replied. "If the criminal division declines to prosecute due to lack of hard proof, the lending agency will resume their collection efforts against you. This entire situation could devolve into a messy, prolonged civil dispute. You would spend years and tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees fighting Apex Financial Recovery in civil court just to protect your wages. We need a direct confession, Kim. We need Dale connecting himself to the act. I ended the call, staring blankly at the dual monitors on my desk. The walls of my office felt suffocating. Dale had insulated himself. He had committed a perfect, stealthy crime, shielding his tracks with the paranoid precision of a man who spent his life curating a flawless suburban facade. He believed he was untouchable. He believed his arrogant intellect had outmaneuvered the federal government and his own daughter. But as I sat in the quiet hum of my office, a dangerous realization sparked in my mind. My father possessed a fatal flaw, a psychological blind spot that eclipsed any technical precaution he could take. Dale suffered from a malignant, consuming narcissism. He needed to be recognized for his perceived brilliance. He thrived on power dynamics, feeding on the submission of others. When he felt threatened, he attacked. But when he felt superior, when he believed his opponent was broken and groveling at his feet, he simply could not resist the urge to gloat. I unlocked my smartphone. I opened the application drawer and located the specialized audio software I frequently used to record negotiations with unreliable freight dispatchers. Oklahoma law dictates that only one participant in a conversation needs to consent to a recording for it to be legally admissible. I toggled the microphone permissions to active. To trap a predator, you cannot act like a hunter. You have to mimic the wounded prey. I opened my text messaging application and navigated to the blocked contacts list. I unblocked my father's phone number. My fingers hovered over the digital keyboard. I needed to craft a message that sounded frantic, defeated, and thoroughly broken. I had to feed his ego, presenting myself as a terrified daughter ready to surrender. I typed out 3 short sentences. The police are asking for the IP logs. I am scared, Dad. Maybe we can fix this. I stared at the glowing text. It went against every fiber of my being to feign weakness to the man who had stolen my future. It felt nauseating, a bitter pill I had to swallow to administer the cure. I pressed send. The digital receipt confirmed the message was delivered. I placed the phone flat on the surface of my desk. I opened the recording application, my thumb resting a fraction of an inch above the bright red capture button. I waited. The seconds ticked by in agonizing slow motion. The ambient noise of the logistics bullpen outside my door faded into a dull, distant murmur. It took less than 30 seconds. The phone vibrated, the screen illuminating with Dale's contact information. He had taken the bait the instant it hit the water. He smelled blood, sensing a victory he was desperate to claim. I pressed the red recording icon. The timer began its silent, steady count. I accepted the incoming call, bringing the device to my ear. "Dad?" I said, forcing my voice to tremble, injecting a breathy, frantic edge into the single word. A low, dark chuckle rumbled through the receiver. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated triumph. "I told you, Kim," Dale purred, his voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "I told you playing hardball with your family was a mistake. You thought you could send the authorities to my door. You thought a few pieces of printed paper made you a tough corporate executive. Now you see the reality of the situation." I squeezed my eyes shut, channeling every ounce of acting ability I possessed. "They want the digital router history," I stammered, keeping my pitch high and nervous. "The detective said the loan was signed from your house. They are trying to get a warrant for the computers." Dale laughed again, a harsh, booming sound that battered the speaker. "Let them get a warrant. Let them tear the house apart. They will not find a single scrap of evidence. You think those internet protocol logs mean anything to me? You think I am stupid enough to use my own localized network without a shield?" I held my breath, letting the silence stretch, inviting him to fill the void with his own hubris. "I used a virtual private network," Dale boasted, the words tumbling out in an eager, arrogant rush. I routed the connection through a server in Chicago before I ever opened that banking portal. I bought a cheap prepaid tablet from a pawn shop using cash. I downloaded a digital stylus application, copied the signature from your old tax returns, and signed your name perfectly on that screen. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He was handing me the rope. He was tying the noose himself. But what if they find the tablet? I whispered, playing the role of the terrified accomplice. There is no tablet, Dale sneered, his tone turning sharp and commanding. The second the loan was approved, I took a hammer to the glass. I smashed the casing, removed the logic board, and dropped the pieces into a public dumpster behind a strip mall. There is no physical device. There is no digital footprint tying me to that application. The only thing the police have is a daughter who co-signed a loan to help her struggling brother. A daughter who decided to file a fake police report to dodge the bill. He paused, letting the weight of his perceived invincibility settle over the conversation. I had him. I had the intent, the method, and the specific actions he took to conceal the crime. Now listen to me very carefully, Dale ordered, dropping the gloating tone for a menacing growl. You are going to march back into that precinct today. You are going to tell that detective you made a terrible mistake. You are going to withdraw the complaint, drop the charges, and clear those federal holds off my bank accounts. If you do not shut this investigation down by 5 o'clock this evening, I will contact your Human Resources Department. I will ruin your reputation in this city. I will make sure you never work in corporate logistics again. I glanced at the screen of my phone. The recording timer crossed the 5-minute mark. I had captured a lengthy, uninterrupted, highly detailed confession of federal wire fraud, identity theft, and the destruction of evidence. The performance was over. The wounded prey vanished, and the cold, calculating predator returned to the line. I cleared my throat. My posture straightened in my ergonomic chair. When I spoke, my voice was no longer trembling. It was smooth, flat, and lethal. Thanks, Dad. I hit the end call button. The connection severed with a sharp, decisive click. I did not celebrate. I did not cheer. I operated with the silent, efficient precision of a machine. I stopped the recording, saving the high-resolution audio file to my local device. I opened my encrypted corporate email client, drafting a new message addressed simultaneously to Pierce and Detective Miller at the Financial Crimes Unit. I attached the audio file. I typed a single sentence in the body of the email. Subject Dale Roberts. Confession of forgery, wire fraud, and evidence destruction obtained via one-party consent recording. I clicked send. The progress bar swept across the screen, confirming the transmission of the payload. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the sprawling Oklahoma City skyline. Dale had spent the last hour bragging about his brilliant tactical maneuvers. He honestly believed he had bullied me into submission. He thought the game was over. He had no idea that his desperate need to assert dominance had just provided the federal government with the exact ammunition required to execute a fatal strike. The waiting game was over. The paper trail was solidified with a vocal confession. The legal machinery I had set into motion was no longer stalled by reasonable doubt. In just a few short weeks, the silence that currently shielded the Roberts family in Edmond was going to be shattered by a knock at the door, and the consequences of their arrogance would arrive carrying a badge. For 14 days, my world existed in a strange, suspended vacuum. The relentless barrage of digital harassment ceased entirely, replaced by a profound and heavy quiet. I spent those 2 weeks throwing myself into my corporate duties at the logistics firm, finalizing freight routes and negotiating supply chain contracts. I operated with the clinical detachment of a soldier waiting for an artillery strike to land. I knew the audio file I had transmitted to my attorney and the financial crimes detective was a devastating payload. It was only a matter of time before it detonated. The shockwave arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing a quarterly transit manifesto, when my secure line rang. The caller identification displayed the name of my retained attorney, Pierce. I picked up the receiver, my pulse quickening with a sharp spike of anticipation. "Good morning, Kim," Pierce said, his deep voice carrying a rare, undeniable note of satisfaction. "The wheels of justice turn slowly, but when they finally catch traction, the results are undeniable." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, gazing out at the gray, weeping sky over Oklahoma City. "Tell me everything," I replied. "The recording you captured was the definitive catalyst," Pierce explained, the sound of flipping pages echoing softly over the connection. Detective Miller submitted the audio file to the federal prosecutor. The explicit nature of your father's confession provided the exact probable cause required to secure comprehensive warrants. Early this morning, uniformed officers and process servers arrived simultaneously at your parents' residence in Edmond and your brother's detailing shop. A fierce, vindicating thrill coursed through my veins. "Subpoenas have been served to Dale, Patty, and Brad," Pierce continued, outlining the tactical maneuver with surgical precision. "The criminal division is formally pursuing Dale for felony forgery, identity theft, and the destruction of evidence. But the most significant shift occurred on the civil front." I listened intently, gripping the edge of my mahogany desk. I forwarded the recorded confession and the police affidavit directly to the legal department at Apex Financial Recovery, Pierce stated. "Once their internal investigators heard Dale admit to forging your signature and naming you as the corporate officer, their strategy pivoted instantly. They realized you were a dead end. You had the legal shield of a federal fraud victim. So, they aimed their crosshairs at the actual beneficiary of the stolen funds." "They went after Brad," I whispered, visualizing the arrogant former quarterback suddenly facing a legion of corporate lawyers. "Precisely," Pierce confirmed. "Apex filed an emergency injunction. A judge granted a temporary freeze on every single business account tied to Robert's luxury detailing. They are positioning to seize his assets to recover the defaulted principal. Your brother cannot withdraw a single dollar. His operation is entirely paralyzed." I ended the call a few moments later, sitting in the quiet hum of my office. The landscape of the war had shifted fundamentally. The illusion of power my family had clung to was shattered, crushed under the unforgiving weight of the American legal system. The social fallout was instantaneous. The sprawling, toxic smear campaign my parents had orchestrated across the neighborhood dried up overnight. The tearful social media posts vanished, deleted in a frantic panic. The extended family group chat, previously a hotbed of gossip and misplaced sympathy, went dead silent. The suburban bubble of entitlement had been pierced, and the harsh reality of federal indictments rushed in to fill the void. They could no longer spin the narrative. You cannot gaslight a subpoena. By late afternoon, my phone began to buzz. It was not a barrage of threats or demanding insults. It was a slow, pathetic trickle of sheer desperation. Dale sent a text message. It lacked his usual commanding punctuation. It was a single, fractured sentence. "Please, Kim, we need to talk. Just 5 minutes." Patty followed, with an email sent to my personal address. The subject line was blank. The body of the message read like a panicked plea from a stranded survivor. "The police were here. Brad is locked out of his bank. We are begging you, please meet with us. Name the place. We will do whatever you want." The predators had transformed into prey. Stripped of their leverage, facing the terrifying prospect of prison time and financial ruin, they resorted to groveling. I did not want to see them. I wanted to block their numbers permanently and let the justice system sweep them away. But a quiet, resolute part of my mind demanded closure. I needed to look them in the eye one final time. I needed to witness the exact moment they realized my compliance was gone forever. I replied to Patty's email with a single line of text, dictating a time and a neutral location. At 7 o'clock that evening, I pulled into the gravel parking lot of a faded diner situated just off Interstate 35. It was a liminal space, a waypoint for weary truckers and cross-country travelers, smelling of fried oil and diesel exhaust. It was miles away from the manicured lawns and country clubs of Edmond. It was the perfect, sterile environment for a surrender. I walked through the glass doors, the bell jingling a cheerful, incongruous greeting. The diner was mostly empty, bathed in the harsh, flickering glow of overhead neon tubes. I spotted them immediately, huddled together in a red vinyl booth near the back corner. The physical deterioration they had suffered in just a few short weeks was staggering. Dale, a man who built his entire identity on crisp polo shirts and arrogant posture, looked aged and hollow. His shoulders slumped, and a gray, sickly pallor clung to his skin. Patty sat beside him, nervously shredding a paper napkin into tiny, jagged strips. Her designer makeup was smudged, and the dark roots of her hair betrayed her missed salon appointments. Sitting across from them was Brad. The golden boy looked like a terrified, cornered child. His knee bounced with a frantic, restless energy, shaking the entire table. He wore a stained promotional t-shirt for his detailing business, the logo serving as a cruel reminder of the empire that was currently dissolving around him. I approached the booth, my tailored charcoal suit acting as a suit of armor against their despair. I slid into the vinyl seat across from my parents, sitting next to my brother. I did not offer a greeting. I placed my hands flat on the scratched Formica table and waited. "Kim," Dale started, his voice a raspy, broken whisper. He reached across the table, attempting to grasp my hand. I pulled my arm back, a sharp, instinctive rejection. "Do not touch me," I said, my tone carrying the frigid chill of a winter storm. "Speak." Dale swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. His eyes darted nervously around the empty diner, a paranoid reflex born from the sudden realization that his actions had consequences. "We got served today," Dale rasped, his hands trembling as he pulled them back to his own lap. "Federal agents came to the house. They handed me a stack of papers thick enough to choke a horse. They are talking about wire fraud. They are talking about mandatory minimums." Brad leaned forward, his face pale and slick with nervous sweat. "My business accounts are locked, Kim. I tried to buy supplies this afternoon and my cards were declined. The bank manager told me Apex Financial put a lien on everything. They are going to repossess my equipment. They are going to take the truck. You have to stop this." I looked at my brother, feeling a profound emptiness where familial love should have resided. "I did not freeze your accounts, Brad," I replied, my voice steady and unyielding. "The federal government froze your accounts because you are operating a fraudulent enterprise funded by stolen identity capital." Patty let out a sharp, pathetic whimper, pressing her shredded napkin against her mouth. "Kim, please," she sobbed, genuine terror leaking from her eyes. "Your father could go to jail. He could lose his pension. We will lose everything. You cannot do this to us. We are your family." "You stopped being my family the day you decided my signature was your personal property," I countered, shifting my gaze back to Dale. Dale took a ragged breath, leaning closer, lowering his voice to a desperate, conspiratorial whisper. "I will make this right, Kim. I swear to you, I will fix it." He looked at Patty, then back at me, a wild, cornered light dancing in his hollow eyes. "We will sell the house in Edmond," Dale offered, the words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "We have equity. We will list it tomorrow. We will downsize to an apartment. We will take the cash from the sale and pay off Apex Financial. We will clear the $95,000 debt entirely. You will not owe a single dime." I stared at him, marveling at the persistent delusion clouding his judgment. You think paying the bill erases the crime? I asked. Dale shook his head, his hands gripping the edge of the Formica table. No, you have to do your part. You have to call that detective. You have to tell them you were confused. Tell them you gave me verbal permission to use your name for the LLC, but you forgot. Tell them you retract that audio recording, that I was just bragging and making things up because we were fighting. The sheer, breathtaking cowardice of his proposition hung in the greasy air of the diner. He was not offering an apology. He was not experiencing a moral awakening. He was attempting to bribe a federal witness. He wanted me to perjure myself, to risk my own freedom and professional reputation to construct a fragile lie that would save his skin. He wanted me to absorb his sins one final time. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating as Dale, Patty, and Brad stared at me with wide, desperate eyes. They were holding their breath, waiting for the obedient, conditioned daughter to nod her head and save them from the fire they had started. Instead, I looked at the three strangers sitting across from me, and I prepared to deliver the final, crushing blow to their grand illusion. The silence inside the fated diner stretched into an agonizing void. The only sounds were the persistent hum of the refrigerated pie case near the counter and the distant rumble of a semi-truck speeding down Interstate 35. I sat motionless on the cracked vinyl bench, processing the sheer magnitude of the proposition Dale had just laid across the scratched Formica table. He was asking me to commit perjury. He wanted me to walk into a federal law enforcement office, sit across from Detective Miller, and spin a fabricated tale about granting verbal permission for a $95,000 loan. He wanted me to risk my own freedom, my immaculate corporate reputation, and my entire future just to provide him with an alibi. He honestly believed that offering to sell his house and pay the debt was a fair trade for my criminal complicity. I looked at Patty. My mother sat trembling, her hands clasped tightly together, her tear-streaked face a portrait of intense, breathless anticipation. During my childhood, Patty's tears had been the ultimate ruling authority in our household. Whenever a conflict arose, whenever Dale lost his temper or Brad shirked his responsibilities, Patty would weep. Her crying was a biological weapon designed to force my immediate surrender. I had spent 20 years shrinking myself, apologizing for things I never did, just to stop her from sobbing. Today, watching the mascara run down her cheeks, I felt a profound, chilling emptiness. The emotional tether that once bound me to her distress had been severed entirely. I felt zero obligation to soothe her. I felt no guilt watching her squirm under the weight of her own choices. When my silence stretched too long, the fragile hope in the booth began to fracture. The terrified, cornered child sitting next to my parents suddenly vanished, replaced by the entitled, arrogant golden boy I had always known. Brad slammed his hand flat against the tabletop. The ceramic coffee mugs rattled violently, spilling dark liquid onto the Formica.
You cannot do this to me!
Brad shouted, his voice cracking with a potent mixture of fear and blistering rage.
You are ruining my life! I put my blood, sweat, and tears into building Robert's luxury detailing. I spent months cultivating those corporate clients. I was finally making a name for myself. You are just spiteful because you sit in a boring office all day while I am out there hustling. You are trying to destroy my business because you cannot stand seeing me succeed.
I turned my head slowly, fixing my gaze on my older brother. Brad had never possessed an ounce of genuine work ethic. His entire existence was a subsidized illusion. He spent his high school years relying on tutors I paid for, coasting on his athletic prowess. His adult life was a series of grandiose ideas funded by Dale and Patty's dwindling savings. He did not know the meaning of the word hustle. His version of hard work was driving a pristine, stolen truck around the suburbs, playing the role of a successful entrepreneur, while the real owner of the company financed his fantasy. I reached forward and pushed my coffee cup back. the ceramics scraping harshly against the table. "I did not ruin your business, Brad," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. "You built it on stolen money." Brad opened his mouth to argue, his face flushing dark red, but I did not give him the oxygen. I shifted my focus directly to the man sitting across from me. Dale stared back, his hollow eyes wide, realizing in real time that his manipulation tactic was failing spectacularly. He opened his mouth, likely to issue another empty threat, but I cut him off. "And Dad, you did not do this for the family," I stated, enunciating every single syllable with razor-sharp precision. "You did not forge my signature and steal my identity out of some misguided patriarchal duty to help your son. You did it for your own ego. You wanted to feel like a big-shot investor. You wanted the thrill of funding a company without taking on any of the actual risk. You used my pristine credit history as your personal playground because you lacked the courage and the capital to build something yourself." Dale recoiled as if I had struck him across the face. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. I had stripped away the heroic narrative he used to justify his felony. I forced him to look into the mirror, and he was horrified by the reflection. Patty let out another sharp, ragged wail. She reached across the table, her trembling fingers brushing the sleeve of my blazer. "Kim, please," she begged, her voice dissolving into a frantic, high-pitched plea. "They are going to put him in a federal prison. He will not survive it. You are sentencing your own father to jail. You have to retract the police report. We will give you anything you want." I stood up. The motion was swift and decisive. I slid out of the vinyl booth and towered over the three strangers sitting at the table. I looked down at them, feeling a soaring, unburdened sense of liberation. The invisible chains of obligation, the decades of conditioning that demanded I sacrifice my peace for their comfort, dissolved into dust. I had conquered my own history. I had chosen my own survival over their toxic demands, and the victory was absolute. "I am not retracting the police report," I declared, my voice carrying the unyielding weight of a gavel striking a sounding block. "I am not withdrawing the audio recording. I am not calling Detective Miller. And I am certainly not committing perjury to shield you from the federal government." Dale stared up at me, his chest heaving. "You are really going to walk away?" he rasped, his tone laced with a venomous disbelief. "You are going to let them destroy us?" "I am letting you reap exactly what you sowed," I answered. "You set the house on fire. Do not blame me for refusing to burn with you." I turned my back on them. I did not wait for another tearful plea from Patty. I did not wait for another entitled outburst from Brad. I walked toward the front of the diner, my heels clicking a steady rhythmic cadence against the checkered linoleum floor. The bell attached to the glass door jingled a bright, cheerful farewell as I pushed my way out into the cool evening air. I did not look back. I crossed the gravel parking lot, the crunching stones echoing in the quiet night. The oppressive humidity of the Oklahoma afternoon had broken, giving way to a crisp, sweeping breeze that carried the scent of rain and wet asphalt. I unlocked my sedan, climbed into the driver's seat, and closed the door. Sitting in the quiet cabin, I exhaled a long, steady breath. The confrontation was over. I had drawn a permanent boundary in wet cement, and it was already hardening. The fear that had stalked me for weeks was entirely gone. I reached into the passenger seat and rested my hand on the hard plastic briefcase containing my legal files. The criminal investigation was proceeding exactly as intended. Dale would face the federal prosecutors. Patty would watch her suburban facade crumble into ruin. But my brother remained a loose end. The temporary injunction Apex Financial Recovery had placed on Brad's accounts paralyzed his operations. But the commercial loan was still technically active, The towering $95,000 debt remained tethered to my Social Security number, acting as a massive anchor dragging down my financial future. I needed that debt extinguished immediately to reclaim my credit score and purchase my new home. I could not afford to wait months for the federal court to sort through the wreckage of my father's forgery. I pulled the state incorporation paperwork from the briefcase and turned on the overhead dome light. I traced my finger over the official government seal. Roberts Luxury Detailing, LLC. Dale had named me the sole proprietor. He had listed me as the chief executive officer with 100% equity. In his desperate attempt to secure the lowest possible interest rate, he had unwittingly handed me the keys to the entire kingdom. A slow, brilliant realization illuminated my mind. Brad was driving a $70,000 heavy-duty truck. He possessed $25,000 worth of commercial-grade power washing equipment. He held valuable service contracts. Those assets did not belong to my brother. According to the state of Oklahoma, they belonged to me. I started the engine of my car, a fierce, calculating energy flooding my system. I shifted the vehicle into drive and pulled out of the diner parking lot, merging onto the dark stretch of the interstate. The emotional warfare was officially concluded. It was time to initiate a ruthless corporate takeover, and I knew exactly how to liquidate every single thing Brad held dear. The morning after the diner confrontation, I arrived at my attorney's downtown office before the receptionist had even unlocked the front doors. I carried the hard plastic briefcase containing the state incorporation filings. The cool, decisive energy that had flooded my system the previous night had crystallized into a ruthless, actionable strategy. I sat across from Pierce, watching the morning sun illuminate the dust motes dancing in the air above his glass desk. I do not want to wait for the federal prosecutors to untangle my father's criminal case, I told Pierce, sliding the LLC registration paperwork across the smooth surface. The commercial loan is still active. The debt is still crushing my credit score. Apex Financial Recovery froze my brother's accounts, but the physical assets are still sitting in his driveway. I want to liquidate the company. Pierce picked up the state documents, his brow furrowing as he studied the ownership structure. Dale registered you as the sole proprietor and chief executive officer of Roberts Luxury Detailing, Pierce confirmed, tracing his expensive pen down the page. You hold 100% of the equity. Legally speaking, this is your business. I leaned back in my leather chair, crossing my arms. Which means I possess the unilateral authority to dissolve the enterprise and sell off the assets to satisfy the corporate debt. A slow, appreciative smile spread across Pierce's face. He set the paperwork down and folded his hands. It is a brilliant maneuver, Kim. We do not need a criminal conviction to authorize a corporate liquidation. As the CEO, you can voluntarily surrender the collateral to the primary creditor. Apex Financial will gladly dispatch a recovery team to collect the equipment and the vehicle. The proceeds from the auction will wipe out the $95,000 balance, clearing your name from the ledger entirely. Draft the authorization, I ordered. Pierce typed rapidly on his keyboard, generating a formal corporate dissolution and asset surrender agreement. 10 minutes later, he printed the document. I picked up a pen and signed my actual, authentic signature on the bottom line. I handed the paper back to him, authorizing the immediate repossession of my brother's entire, fabricated empire. The execution of the corporate takeover occurred 48 hours later, on a pristine Saturday morning. It was the perfect time for a suburban reckoning. I did not drive to Edmond to witness the event in person. I did not need to gloat or participate in the chaotic spectacle. I stayed in my apartment, sipping black coffee, while Pierce relayed the updates directly from the Apex Financial Recovery Coordinator. But based on the frantic, hysterical voicemails that began flooding my blocked message folder an hour later, I could visualize the scene with absolute, cinematic clarity. Saturday mornings in my parents' neighborhood were a choreographed display of domestic perfection. Neighbors were out manicuring their lawns, walking their purebred dogs, and washing their expensive cars. The air smelled of cut grass and expensive fertilizer. Into this tranquil setting rolled a massive, heavy-duty commercial tow truck, its amber lights flashing a blinding, urgent warning against the quiet street. The recovery agents parked directly in front of Brad's house. They did not knock on the door to negotiate. They operated with the swift, merciless efficiency of professionals holding a signed corporate surrender order. They backed the tow truck into the wide concrete driveway, the hydraulic lifts whining loudly as they positioned the steel forks under the axles of the gleaming black Ford F-250. Brad burst out of his front door, wearing pajama pants and a white undershirt, screaming at the top of his lungs. He charged down the driveway, waving his arms, demanding the agents step away from his property. He threatened to call the police. He threatened to sue them. He paraded his usual arrogant bluster, expecting the blue-collar workers to cower in the face of his anger. The lead recovery agent simply reached into his clipboard and handed Brad the formal liquidation order. My brother looked at the document, his eyes scanning the bold legal print. He saw my authentic signature authorizing the seizure of the vehicle, the commercial-grade power washers, and every single piece of industrial equipment bolted to the truck bed. The realization struck him like a physical blow. He did not own the business. He was merely an unauthorized operator driving a company car, and the chief executive had just revoked his privileges. Brad stood paralyzed in the center of his driveway, stripped of his power, watching the hydraulic winch lift his $70,000 status symbol into the air. The flashing amber lights and the shouting had drawn an audience. Doors opened up and down the street, neighbors stepped out onto their porches, people walking their dogs stopped on the sidewalks, pulling out their smartphones to record the spectacle. The pristine illusion of the Golden Boy was being dismantled in broad daylight, broadcast live to the very community my parents had spent 30 years trying to impress. Standing on the front porch, watching the humiliation unfold, was Ashley. My sister-in-law did not run down the driveway to defend her husband. She did not yell at the repo agents or demand justice. Ashley watched the heavy-duty truck drag away the source of her internet clout, the vehicle that funded her #blessed lifestyle. The money was gone. The fake prestige was gone. She looked at Brad, standing barefoot and defeated on the concrete, and she realized the ride was permanently over. Ashley packed her designer luggage that same afternoon. She called her parents, loaded her belongings into her compact sedan, and drove away without leaving a note. The marriage, built entirely on a foundation of stolen credit and suburban vanity, collapsed the moment the funds dried up. The social shockwave did not stop with Brad's public repossession. The truth about the Roberts family sickness finally reached the extended relatives, but it did not come from me. I maintained my impenetrable radio silence. The revelation arrived through the cold, undeniable channels of the local justice system. When Dale was formally indicted for federal wire fraud and identity theft, his name populated the public court dockets. In a tight-knit community where gossip is the primary currency, a federal indictment is impossible to conceal. Aunt Carol, cousin Sarah, and the neighborhood association members who had previously left sympathetic comments on Patty's weeping social media posts suddenly discovered the public records. They read the unsealed charges. They saw the dates, the dollar amounts, and the nature of the forgery. The smear campaign backfired with devastating, irreversible force. The extended family realized Dale had brazenly lied to them. He had invented a malicious story about a gambling addiction to cover up his own felony, manipulating their sympathy to isolate his innocent daughter. The backlash was swift and brutal. Patty was quietly removed from the neighborhood association board. Cousin Sarah blocked my parents' phone numbers. The Roberts name became toxic, spoken only in hushed, judgmental whispers in the aisles of the local grocery store. Dale tried to fight the charges initially, clinging to his arrogant belief that he could outsmart the federal prosecutors. But his bravado shattered the moment the assistant district attorney played the audio recording of our phone call in the deposition room. Hearing his own voice, bragging about using a virtual private network, detailing the destruction of the tablet, and threatening to ruin my career, left his defense attorney completely speechless. Facing the terrifying reality of a mandatory minimum prison sentence, Dale surrendered. He accepted a plea deal to avoid serving time in a federal penitentiary. The terms of the agreement were financially and socially catastrophic. Dale was ordered to pay massive punitive fines and full restitution for the investigative costs. He was placed on supervised probation for 5 years. But the most destructive consequence of the plea deal was the permanent entry added to his criminal record. He was now a convicted felon, guilty of a severe financial crime. His employer, the oil services firm where he had spent 2 decades pushing papers and judging his subordinates, ran an automatic compliance check following the indictment. Corporate policy prohibited the employment of individuals convicted of financial fraud. Dale was called into the Human Resources Department on a Tuesday morning. He was stripped of his managerial title, his security badge, and his corporate pension. Security guards escorted him out of the glass building. He carried his personal belongings in a small cardboard box, enduring the exact public humiliation he had tried to inflict upon me in the lobby of my own firm. The poetic justice of their downfall was a masterpiece of their own design. In their desperate, ruthless attempt to sacrifice me to save the golden boy, they had engineered their own total destruction. They handed me the legal authority to liquidate Brad's fake empire. They pushed me to collect the audio evidence that secured Dale's felony conviction. They spun a web of lies so outrageous that it permanently destroyed their social legacy when the truth finally came to light. They dug a deep, dark grave meant for my future, and then they tripped and fell into it themselves. The truth provided all the vengeance necessary. I did not have to lift a finger to ruin them. I simply stepped out of the way and let the natural consequences of their extreme arrogance crush them into dust. With the $95,000 commercial loan satisfied by the auction of the business assets, the heavy anchor chaining me to the past was finally severed. The federal fraud holds were lifted from my profile. My credit report was wiped clean of their toxicity, presenting me with a blank, pristine canvas. The war was definitively over, and as I walked into my logistics firm a few months later, a new, unexpected envelope waiting on my desk signaled that the final, glorious chapter of my independence was about to begin. It has been exactly 365 days since the commercial tow truck pulled away from my brother's driveway, dragging his fabricated empire down the street. Time possesses a remarkable, silent power to filter out the noise. The frantic, exhausting chaos that defined my existence for 3 decades evaporated, replaced by a profound, unbroken quiet. My mornings no longer begin with the dread of incoming text messages or the suffocating weight of unearned guilt. I wake up, grind my own coffee beans, and listen to the gentle hum of the city stirring to life outside my windows. The ghost of the $95,000 debt has been thoroughly exorcised. Following the liquidation of the detailing business, Apex Financial Recovery processed the auction proceeds, balancing the ledger to zero. The federal fraud alerts were lifted from my Social Security number, and my credit score climbed steadily, cresting back into the elite 800s. My name belongs to me again. Walking into my corner office at the logistics firm on a crisp Tuesday morning, I found a stack of sorted mail resting on my desk. Most of it consisted of standard corporate correspondence, trade magazines, and vendor contracts, but nestled in the center of the pile was a thick, ivory envelope bearing the return address of the Oklahoma County District Court. I picked up my silver letter opener and sliced through the heavy paper. Inside was a formal legal document folded around a certified cashier's check. I pulled the check out and stared at the printed numbers. It was a staggering sum. The court-ordered civil restitution mandated that Dale and Patty reimburse every single dollar I had lost during their fraudulent campaign. The check covered the exorbitant attorney fees I paid to Pierce, the court costs, and most importantly, the $12,000 in forfeited earnest money from the Tulsa property. My parents were forced to drain whatever meager retirement savings they had left to pay me back for the financial damage they caused. I held the slip of paper in my hand, feeling the crisp edges against my fingertips. It was not just currency. It was a tangible, undeniable admission of their guilt. It was the physical manifestation of consequence, delivered directly to my desk. During my lunch break, I drove to the exact same bank branch where this nightmare began a year ago. I parked in the same asphalt lot, walked through the same double glass doors, and felt a strange, poetic symmetry wash over me. I did not sit in Mr. Davis's office this time, sweating under the glare of a denied mortgage application. I bypassed the desks and walked straight up to the teller counter. The teller smiled, asking for my identification. I slid my driver's license across the polished stone. Then, I turned the court-issued check over. I took a pen from my purse and pressed the ink to the endorsement line. I signed my name. I crafted the letters with deliberate, sweeping strokes, leaving my authentic, undeniable signature on the paper. The teller processed the deposit, printing a receipt that confirmed the funds were securely resting in my personal savings account. I walked back out into the Oklahoma sun, breathing in the fresh air, feeling a soaring sense of closure. The loop was officially closed. Those restituted funds did not sit idle for long. I used the money to close on a new property. It was not the isolated house in Tulsa I originally wanted. It was infinitely better. I bought a stunning, modern home closer to the vibrant heart of the city, featuring a sprawling backyard, floor-to-ceiling windows, and an outdoor living space perfect for hosting actual friends. I furnished the rooms exactly how I wanted, filling the space with art, thriving plants, and an overwhelming sense of peace. There are no surprise visits. There are no manipulative phone calls interrupting my dinner. No one expects me to fund their mistakes or apologize for my own success. The silence that used to terrify me, the silence I was conditioned from childhood to fill with concessions and eager obedience, has become my favorite sound. It is the sound of total freedom. The professional vindication arrived just a few hours after my bank visit. The chief executive officer of the logistics firm called me into the primary boardroom. He did not ask about my family or the dramatic scene that had unfolded in the atrium a year prior. He judged me strictly on my merits. He laid a new, heavy employment contract on the mahogany table. He cited my flawless execution of the aerospace transit routes, my ability to secure lucrative regional deals, and my unshakable composure under intense pressure. He offered me the position of vice president of logistics. I picked up the pen he offered and signed that contract too. I am thriving in the exact life my father claimed I did not deserve. I hold the title, the salary, and the unyielding respect that Dale spent his entire life failing to achieve. While he sits in a rented apartment, carrying a felony record and stripped of his managerial status, I am commanding a regional supply chain and building an empire of my own design. Let me speak directly to you for a moment. Society pushes a very specific, relentless narrative. They tell you family is everything. They tell you blood is thicker than water, and you must endure endless hardship simply because you share a last name. They expect you to act as a shock absorber for the toxic choices of the people who raised you. But sometimes, family is just the heavy iron anchor trying to drag you to the bottom of the ocean. Cutting the rope is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of sheer survival. I spent 30 years sitting in the passenger seat of my own life, letting other people dictate my worth and forge my path. I let them convince me that I was a secondary character, an invisible safety net designated to catch the golden boy whenever he fell. I believed my sole purpose was to maintain the fragile suburban illusion they so desperately craved. But the moment I refused to be a victim, the moment I established an unbreakable boundary and let the blinding light of the truth hit their lies, their entire illusion collapsed into dust. I did not have to shout. I did not have to match their frantic, hysterical energy. I just had to stand firm, hold up the mirror, and let them destroy themselves with their own hubris. If you are sitting in the dark right now, letting toxic people rewrite your reality and drain your resources, I want you to hear this clearly. You do not owe them your future. You do not have to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. You have the right to walk away from any table where respect is no longer being served. It is time to take the pen back. Let me know in the comments below what boundary you are setting today. Tell me what anchor you are finally cutting loose. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of survival and strength. And always remember, your signature belongs only to you. The architecture of a broken home. What we owe our children. There is a uniquely American mythology woven into the fabric of the traditional family structure. A deeply held belief that a shared last name is an unbreakable covenant, a sacred bond that must be preserved at all costs. We are raised on a cultural diet of Thanksgiving dinners, manicured suburban lawns, and the quiet, persistent expectation that blood is thicker than water. We are taught that parents are the ultimate protectors, the architects of our morality, and the safe harbors we can retreat to when the world becomes too harsh. But what happens when the harbor itself is rigged with explosives? What happens when the architects of your life decide to dismantle your foundation simply to build a monument to their own vanity? The story of Kim, Dale, Patty, and the golden boy Brad is not just a sensational tale of corporate identity theft or a dramatic legal thriller. At its core, it is a devastatingly quiet tragedy about the catastrophic failure of parenting values. It is a cautionary reflection on what happens when adults mistake enabling for love, and when a family prioritizes the hollow illusion of success over the heavy, unglamorous work of honesty, fairness, and emotional awareness. In traditional American culture, there is often a dangerous conflation between financial prosperity and moral goodness. We are conditioned to believe that a shiny new truck in the driveway or a booming entrepreneurial venture is the ultimate proof that a parent has succeeded in raising a capable child. Dale and Patty fell victim to this exact suburban delusion. They were so desperate to project the image of a successful, thriving family that they became entirely blind to the rot festering beneath their own roof. When Dale forged his daughter's signature for a $95,000 commercial loan, he did not believe he was committing a felony. In his twisted psychological landscape, he was simply reallocating family resources. He looked at his son, a 33-year-old man who refused to outgrow his high school glory days, and decided that Brad's fragile ego was more valuable than Kim's hard-earned independence. This is the dark, insidious underside of the golden child dynamic. By shielding Brad from the natural consequences of his own financial incompetence, Dale and Patty did not protect their son. They destroyed him. They robbed him of the opportunity to develop resilience, accountability, and the basic emotional maturity required to function in the real world. A parent's true responsibility is not to clear every obstacle from their child's path, but to teach them how to climb over the rubble when the path inevitably collapses. By offering Brad a stolen shortcut, they guaranteed his ultimate failure. Conversely, Kim was relegated to the role of the invisible workhorse, the scapegoat expected to quietly absorb the shockwaves of her brother's mediocrity. Her parents demanded total self-sacrifice while offering absolutely zero emotional support. This dynamic highlights a chilling absence of fairness in family structures where children are assigned rigid roles. Kim was punished for her competence. Her pristine credit score, built through years of grueling graveyard shifts and careful budgeting, was viewed by her parents not as an achievement to be celebrated, but as a communal asset to be plundered. True parenting requires an acute, unwavering emotional awareness. It demands the humility to look at your children as sovereign individuals, not as extensions of your own ego or as tools to correct your own past mistakes. Dale's malignant narcissism and Patty's weaponized tears created an environment where the truth was treated as an act of treason. When Kim confronted them, they did not apologize. They did not experience a moral awakening. They demanded that she finance their crime to keep the peace. They expected her to set herself on fire to keep their grand illusion warm. This raises a profound question about long-term guidance and what we actually owe our families. We are taught to forgive. We are told to turn the other cheek, to endure the slights and the betrayals because they are your parents or he is your brother. But enduring abuse is not a virtue. It is a tragedy disguised as loyalty. The most vital lesson a parent can teach a child is how to set a firm, unyielding boundary. Ironically, Kim had to teach this lesson to herself. She had to learn that the highest form of self-respect is walking away from any table where honesty and fairness are no longer being served. When Kim initiated the corporate takeover, liquidating the very assets her family had stolen from her, it was not an act of malice. It was a masterclass in natural consequences. She simply removed the artificial shield her parents had constructed and let reality crash down upon them. It is a stark reminder that the truth does not need to be defended with shouting matches or tearful social media campaigns. The truth simply stands on its own, waiting patiently for the illusions to burn away. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever found yourself shrinking in the shadows of a sibling, or if you have ever been expected to quietly shoulder the burden of a family member's toxic choices, I encourage you to follow Zara Told Stories. We explore the deep, often unspoken complexities of family dynamics, trauma, and the incredible power of reclaiming your own narrative. Hit the subscribe button to join a community of people who understand that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to play the role you were assigned. As we reflect on the wreckage of the Roberts family, we must confront a deeply uncomfortable reality about the nature of unconditional love. We are universally taught that a parent's love for their child should be without conditions, without limits, and without end. We accept this as the highest moral absolute of the human experience. But perhaps we have been lying to ourselves. Perhaps the conventional wisdom is entirely wrong. Unconditional love, when applied to adults who refuse to take accountability for their own destruction, is not a virtue at all. It is a slow, agonizing poison. It breeds monsters who believe they can harvest the souls of the people closest to them without ever facing a penalty. The true, terrifying inheritance we leave our children is not our wealth, our property, or our family name. The true inheritance is the weight of the lies we tell to keep ourselves comfortable. Look closely at your own life. Look at the people you defend, the secrets you keep, and the boundaries you are too afraid to draw. Ask yourself, are you building a foundation for the future? Or are you just signing your name to a debt that will eventually cost you everything? Sometimes, the most profound act of love you can offer your family is to let them fall. Because in the end, you cannot save people from the fires they enjoy setting. You can only decide how close you are willing to stand to the flames.